Yo, what's up guys? So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto switches his opponents with Shikamaru during the preliminary round before the third stage, part 7, the last part. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Chilord, link is in the description, and also subscribe to my channel, and like this video. Let's begin the video. Tayuya twisted herself around the savage swipes of Kin's attack, an angry grimace written upon her features. She hated being on the defensive. She hated the constant, direct pressure Kin was able to keep on her. She hated that insufferable, predatory smirk written upon Kin's face. Then she was flying, until she wasn't. The momentum of her forced flight bouncing off of the tree she hit, and slamming back into her body. She arched in a silent scream of pain, refusing to let the sound gain life before she thrust forward. Panting softly, she glared up at where Kin was smirking at her, watching her, as she crouched down on the ground like some predator watching her prey. And so far that's exactly what it has been. Kin was the predator, and Tayuya was the prey. She hated it like nothing she'd ever encountered before. With Orochimaru, it was expected. With Sakura and Yukon it had been proven when they first met. The same with Kimimaro, and that bastard Kabuto, too. Kin had been trash. Weak, unimportant, she had just been a pawn sent off to sacrifice. That was all she was ever supposed to be. Now you wouldn't be running away, would you, Tayuya-chan? Kin clucked her tongue, and shook her head, as she grinned back at her. No, that won't do, not at all. Saban shot out lightning-fast needles that forced her to keep moving. They came from every direction, raining upon her from a growing swarm of smirking faces staring back at her. All of them identical, all of them bearing the same sadistic smirk she'd worn herself countless times. Now, that's not the face of a girl having fun. The Kins launched another wave of, forcing her back against the tree, as the needles blossomed on either side of her. You used to tell me that cat and mouse was your favorite game. Come on, Mouse-chan. Don't tell me that changed. Growling, Tayuya saw red. She wasn't going to be the mouse. She was not the mouse. She was the goddamn tiger among the fucking sheep. Her fist slammed into King's face, sending the girl stumbling back with a snap. Then her head came up, and she grinned, her split lip giving a grisly stain to her teeth. Well now, looks like she has a Mouse-chan, and has some claws after all. Tayuya stared for a moment. She couldn't help it. She was no Jurubu, but she knew how to throw a punch, and with her curse seal active. Then King first hit her own face, and she was sent back, reeling, as she could feel her nose crunching, and cracking beneath the sudden pressure. Tears suddenly clouding her eyes, she moved, following the bleary form she could barely make out. Block, parry, block, kick, feel the satisfying grunt, as her knee found Kin's stomach. Then a fist hit her own gut, and she stumbled back. Claws raked across her chest, the wounds burning like fire, as she twisted forward, and then raked her horns against King's own body. It wasn't her usual tactic. She'd never actually had an opponent get this close to her for this long without being intercepted by her doki or knocking her out. Not since she'd acquired her seal. Still, she could feel the resistance, the hiss of pain that left Kin's lips, as close as she was. With a vicious growl, she scratched up, trying to take her fingers across Kin's eyes. A moment later, she could feel the scraping of skin beneath her nails, but knew she hadn't found her mark. Well, I guess you do have some claws after all, huh, Mouse-chan? Kin growled back, her anger laced with anticipation. Did you like the way mine felt earlier? How about I give you another taste? Bring it, trash, Tayuya spat back, spraying the blood gushing from her nose into King's face, as she took advantage of the flinch to grab handfuls of Kin's hair, and smash the curved back horn at the top of her head into Kin's face before kicking her away with a snarl. She couldn't make out exactly how Kin had reacted, her eyes still streaming with tears. Still, she could pull out a spare kunai, and leap forward with a snarl. Viciously, she swiped at Kin's stomach, snarling softly when she felt the girl grab her wrist, and viciously twist while roughly bending her wrist forward. Then she could feel the wet popping snap, as her wrist fully snapped, and the kunai fell from suddenly limp fingers, as the sensation was lost in a spiking haze of pain. Gritting her teeth, she attempted to smash her knee up between Kin's legs, only it would seem Kin had beaten her to the punch, as she felt hard knee smashing into the most sensitive part of her body. She screamed then, her legs reflectively clenching together, as she doubled forward. Then she could feel a pair of hands grabbing her by her horns. Suddenly she was being pulled, dragged, forward at a vicious speed before suddenly halting, face first in the trunk of a tree. Then she was pulled back, and it was repeated. Then again. It was during the third that she finally succumbed to the darkening veil of unconsciousness. Kin snarled, as she felt Tayuya finally go slack in her grip before she threw the bloodied, beaten girl to the ground, her curse seal starting to recede back into her body. Grunting softly, she released her hold on the chakra pulsing through her system, and she felt the sudden rush of burning, aching pain rippling across her body. It was so easy to ignore it while under the effects of the demonic chakra, but now, hissing softly, she found her way gingerly over towards where Tayuya had been forced to drop her kunai, and retrieved the blade. Almost limping back to Tayuya's once more completely normal, albeit bloodied, form, she grabbed hold of the girl's hair, and pulled her head back, baring her throat to the world. When she brought the blade down to the waiting flesh, a voice coughed politely nearby. While I'm sure I can appreciate the sentiment, we prefer to take defeated enemy Nin caught close to Konoha alive if possible, Genma noted, as he watched her neutrally. We can get more information out of them that way. For a moment Kin seemed to ponder that statement, her eyes darting over him, noting the vague familiarity, and the headband he wore before glancing around, as her fingers tightened on the kunai, pressing it more tightly into Tayuya's throat. Noting Ino not too far away, she saw the blonde give the slightest nod of her head in confirmation. Slowly, reluctantly, she let her shoulder release some slight bit of their tension. She nodded her head, and removed the kunai from Tayuya's throat. That scarred guy, Marino-san? Kin asked hopefully, as she tightened her grip on Tayuya's hair, with her eyes darting everywhere, but Genma's face. Considering who you just caught is, you better damned well believe it, Genma agreed with a nod. Good. Kin just dropped Tayuya's face back into the ground before starting to spin the kunai in a full rotation about her finger, catching it, before spinning it again in swift repetition. Don't suppose you have something to tie her up with? I'm sure we can find something. Shizen-san should be here shortly to see to your wounds, Genma agreed, as he reached into his vest, and withdrew a scroll, a line of blood across its contents, and he had both a field medical kit, and a set of restraints unsealed. You keep your restraints with your medical kit? Kin asked with a bemused quirk of her lips despite the pain she was feeling, as she momentarily paused the nervous playing with her kunai, as she peered desperately in the distance to try to make out how Naruto was doing. No, I keep medical supplies in my prisoner kit, he responded easily enough. More efficient that way. Namikaze-sama thought of it. Yandame-sama? Kin asked warily, her narrowed eyes flicking in the direction Naruto had gone, as she clenched her fingers tightly about the kunai's grip, but said nothing else. Another story, for another day, Genma stated. Now hold still. I need to get those wounds cleaned properly or Shizen-san will give me something that'll have me in the bathroom for weeks. Kin snorted softly in agreement, but reluctantly allowed the man to go to work. Tamari frowned, as she continued to weave about Jirobu's strikes, though he had gotten significantly faster since he invoked his curse seal fully. Twice he had attempted to invoke another earth ninjutsu technique, only both were primarily static defensive measures. In response, she'd either backed away, forcing him to abandon it, and pursue her, or she'd gone around it. While she was doing well in holding him off, it had become a battle of attrition, as she was exceptionally limited to the tools she had available to her. The fans had left Jirobu bloody, and cut up, but he didn't seem to be stopping any time soon, which left her in a less than enviable position. You know, I'm pretty sure you won't really listen, but what the hell, Tamari offered with a bland shrug of her shoulder. I'm pretty sure Naruto-sama would prefer for me to give you at least a shot at walking out of this without being utterly humiliated and crippled. Big talk for a girl who's barely done anything more than scratch me, Jirobu snapped back with a growl. You mean the girl that took away a lot of the functionality in your arm, and you still haven't touched? Tamari shot back with a sigh filled with boredom. I mean really, you might have been able to do something against some of the more useless genin I've seen, but here, now? When he clenched up, his mouth opening for a retort, she slid forward again, and slashed out once more into the wound she'd already opened up in his arm. His new skin made newer cuts harder to inflict, but what was already opened up was another matter entirely. As blood flashed across the razor edge, she twisted around another rage-fueled blow, and slashed up into one of the wounds the earlier Naruto clone had opened up on his chest. Here, and now you're nothing but a beaten fool who doesn't realize he already lost, she answered her own question with a bored, cool voice. Jirobu bellowed violently, as the pectoral muscles beneath the cut were further slashed beneath the flash of the fan. Fresh blood leaking down his chest, he attacked again, a surge of adrenaline powering his movements. She simply flipped back in response, her fan slashing up, cutting deep into another one of previous wounds the boy had taken. When he stumbled, she tilted her head to the side before noting clinically, "You keep this up, and you're going to die. Just wanting to make sure you realize that." "I won't," he said with a gritted growl, glaring back at Tamari, who shrugged her shoulders with a bemused smirk on her lips. "Of course. I mean, it's not like you've had some of your most important muscle groups slashed up, and you're leaking blood so fast you're already having trouble standing straight," she shot back, her fan snapping open for a moment, then snapping shut again, as she pursed her lips. Ah well, idiots will be idiots. Just be glad my brother isn't here. He would have been messy. Jiruba stared at her incredulously for a moment, watching, as suddenly her fan started flicking around her wrists in a distracting, dazzling contortion of movements, as she smirked at him, and continued, "Do try not to sound too pathetic when you're bleeding out? It's really depressing to be reminded that you were so weak. You. He struggled with the words, swaying both with rage and weakness. Bitch, yes, now, bye. She agreed with a cheerful wave of her fan before Jiruba felt a smashing pain in the back of his neck, and collapsed into unconsciousness. Hello again, Proctor-san. Did you enjoy the show? Not as much as the last one you were in, Gemma said easily enough, as he glanced down at the unconscious Jiruba. Though your performance was better in this one. Oh, Proctor-san, what would my master think of you saying such things about me? Tamari demurely hid her face behind her bloody fan, and batted her lashes back at him. Thinking such things? Why, watching me, studying me, I could feel those eyes on me the whole time, making me feel so very naughty. When he just gave her a bemused look, and patiently asked, or? Huffing slightly, she snapped her fan shut, and crossed her arms about her chest, though she still smirked slightly. Or you were just waiting to see if I was going to become a damsel in distress, or if you needed to shove something hard and sharp into my back. You do realize I'm 15 years too old to really get flustered by the double ententes, right? Genma noted with a smirk before shaking his head and sighing slightly. Damn if I don't know if I should be jealous of the brat or pity him. Now why would someone think they should be anything but absolutely, completely jealous of master being able to have his way with this hot, flexible little body of mine? Tamari asked, as she batted her lashes and put on an expression of absolute innocence. The fact that you're a mocking, sadistic bitch probably plays a big part in it, Genma stated simply with a smirk. Ah, you say the sweetest things, Proctor-san, she said with a vicious smirk. That's nice. Now, secure your captive, Genma stated, as he tossed her a scroll lazily. And since you're in such fine shape, you can clean his wounds while we wait for the medic to show up. Tamari reflexively caught the scroll, and glared at him, as she muttered some unflattering things under her breath, but nonetheless went to work. Sakan and Yukon stared around them with a frown, as they noted the number of clones surrounding them. Ringing around the ground, perched in the tree limbs, stuck to the trunks, they surrounded them from every direction with angry, focused eyes. With an absent motion, Sakan rubbed his hands against his stomach, and narrowed his eyes in irritation. He could still remember the last clone he'd had to face. If each of these had the same capabilities, don't let them escape, Naruto stated simply, as he watched the pair with narrowed eyes, and then readied himself, cocking his head to the side, crouching down, and watching them, as his whole body tensed up. Sakan stared at Naruto for a moment before slowly beginning to chuckle, a chuckle that slowly devolved into a burning laughter. Escape, don't let us escape. You he ha 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 ha. Yukon glared at his brother, and growled softly, this isn't the time for joking around. Or are you forgetting we're on a deadline? Well, fine, he already revealed himself, Sakan grumbled irritably. If you want it done already, go, and finish it, and ruin the fun. I was planning to, Yukon snapped, as he suddenly threw a smoke bomb down at his feet. If you think a little smoke is going to stop me, you're dead wrong, Naruto growled back, as he took a deep breath, focusing on his breath, on the feel of wind chakra, then suddenly exhaled, fueling the breath that left his mouth with it. The wind that left his mouth was hardly enough to do any kind of damage to anyone, however that was hardly the intent, as it dispersed the smoke into nothing, but thin plumes that hid nothing. It worked quickly, efficiently, only it revealed Yukon was no longer there. Hey, you should have just let your clones finish us off, Sakan chuckled, as he leered back at Naruto. You probably would have won then. Now it's all over. Like hell it is, Naruto said with a growl before a voice spoke up right next to him. Hey, looking for me maybe? Yukon said from where his head was suddenly sprouting out of Naruto's own body. Wah, what the hell? Naruto tried to smash his elbow back into the attached head, only for it to go out of the way with a smirk, as another hand snagged the extended elbow. Do you know why Orochimaru picked us? No, of course you don't, Yukon asked rhetorically with a smirking sneer. My abilities are uniquely suited for assassination, and in my level 2 state, my body can merge with yours, sharing my body with yours. The same proteins, same cells, the same chakra pathways until I start tearing them apart. Yukon paused a moment before grinning viciously at Naruto. Shall I show you? Naruto snarled a moment before pausing, as he recalled the words Jiraiya and Anko had informed him about, and demonic chakra. You dumb shit. Of all the reactions he could have, that was what the brothers had least expected. Seeing their confusion, Naruto grinned back at them. Let me guess, because you can manipulate your bodies like this, it's how you were healing earlier. Humph, And what, you think your little healing trick is going to save you? Sakon countered with a sneering smirk. Yukon's going to tear you apart faster than you can heal it back. Yeah, let's see about that, shall we? And suddenly Naruto growled, as he was engulfed in a pulsing miasma of chakra. Sakon's smirk turned to a look of horror, as Yukon suddenly began to scream and thrash, as he separated himself away from Naruto, as quickly as possible, writhing about on the ground. Portions of his skin began to darken, growing an angry red, before turning an ugly, rotting black. He thrashed wildly, twisting, convulsing, but more than anything, he simply screamed. What did you do to him? Sakon demanded, as he grabbed hold of his brother's body, and tried to force the body to integrate with his, even as his brother resisted. You know the problem with sharing your body with someone by connecting to their chakra system is that you end up sharing their chakra, Naruto said, grimacing slightly, as he couldn't just watch the way that Yukon slowly degraded. Sakon had managed to halfway force his brother back into his body before he felt it hit. The caustic, burning in his chakra, spreading, consuming through him. He stared back at Naruto, mouth opened wide, horrified, as he felt himself falling towards the same fate as his brother. The thing is, without a body able to handle that chakra without a seal to make it safe, harmonized to it, Naruto could feel the bile building up in the back of his throat, as he stared at Sakon. Demonic chakra poisons, and destroys normal chakra pathways. Then Sakon let loose a scream, mirroring his brother's. Naruto could only watch, as they were literally consumed from their own chakra coils. Their screams filled the air, horrible, thrashing, writhing things. He fell to his knees, and could feel the way his stomach quivered, and its contents rose up his throat. Don't look away, the voice was soft, stern, as it filled the air, and for a moment, Naruto looked to see Genma standing there, arms crossed about his chest, as he looked at the boy. You need to see this, you need to understand it. This is what you did to them. Look, and he did. He watched, as their bodies continued to thrash after their screams broke into wet gurgles. He continued to stare, as they finally went still, their flesh half-eaten, the air filled with an acrid smell of rotting, burned flesh. Then he couldn't help but lean forward, emptying the contents of his stomach. Again, and again he retched, puking over and over, until he could feel the burning wretched taste of bile bursting past his lips. Coughing softly, he stared down at the pile of mess he'd made, taking ragged, panting breaths while spit dripped out of his mouth. It's not pretty. It's not nice, it's not clean, and it's not merciful, Gemma said softly, as he stood quietly behind the boy. This is the kind of thing you only use when you absolutely have to. This battle the first time you've been killed? Shakily, Naruto nodded his head, feeling the urge to puke furthering, as the dry heave started to pulse through his body, as he remembered the body of the first nin he'd killed at the start of the battle. You won't like hearing it, but it does get easier. As much as it shouldn't, it does, Genma stated softly, as he looked down at the boy. Eventually, if you're not careful, it can become easier to do than not. That's when you know you have to stop. It needs to be hard. It needs to be something you only do if you have to. If not, that's where monsters come from. Naruto stared up at him, his mouth hanging open to summon up a scream of denial, a refusal, a damnation of what Genma had said, only to feel it die on his lips when he met the man's eyes. It's something we all have to come to terms with, Gemma said simply. It's something we all have to face, and we all have to come to terms with. If we don't, we have no place among shinobi. So never forget this day. Never forget what you did, so you always have something to remind you. Numbly he nodded, shakily pushing himself up to his feet, before uneasily looking at the bodies, then back to Genma uncertainty. What? We'll get a specialist team to get out here to deal with the remains, Gemma said simply before nodding back towards the direction the girls had been fighting in. Head back to your girls. They're all done. Naruto froze for a moment, as he realized he'd completely forgotten about the girls, before looking towards Genma. Are they? They're fine, even the Yamanaka. Genma agreed with a roll of his eyes, and a light shove on Naruto's back. Now go, Shu. I've got to make sure these are watched until we can get someone out here to transport the remains safely. You get to escort the prisoners back to Konoha, and get your first real taste of being a... Ah? Naruto blinked, staring at him in confusion. But wasn't this? Nope, Genma shook his head, just smirking back at the boy. You still have to do the paperwork. Paperwork? Naruto repeated, staring back at him. Yup, paperwork. The higher you get, the worse it becomes, Gemma said with a smirk. Have fun with that. I think I hate you a little, Proctor-san, Naruto said sourly. I know, it's a benefit of the job, Genma agreed with another smirk. Naruto stared a moment at the trussed-up and bandaged figure of Sasuke, staring at the unconscious figure for a moment, before turning his attention to Ino. You did that? What? You saying I'm not capable? She said defensively, as she glared back at him, as Shizen was applying medical chakra to her arm. "Were you always that mean, or did crazy lady corrupt you?" he asked instead, as he shifted and watched her warily. Ino opened her mouth to respond before shutting it, and thinking for a moment, I don't know. I do yell at people a lot less these days, but I do stab them more." Naruto stared for a moment, before sighing, and palming his face slightly. "Why are all the girls in my life violent maniacs? Hey!" Ino, Tamari, and Kin protested, before pausing, glancing at one another, and shrugging a moment, as they grudgingly admitted the point to each other, at least. "I don't know, Naruto-kun. Are you a closet masochist, maybe?" Shizen asked innocently, as she tilted her head to the side, and smiled back at him. "Do I need to teach you about safe words, and make sure you know about how to be tied up without doing any lingering damage?" Naruto stared at her, his mouth opened, and jaw hanging for a moment, before sputtering out, "No, I'm not that kind of pervert. That's Kin-chan." He paused a moment, then continued, "And Sunshine. Hey, I am not a masochist," Tamari declared with a huff. "I simply like it rough." "Naruto-kun, are you saying there's something wrong with being willing to inflict a certain level of violence upon a situation?" Ino demanded sweetly, as she batted her eyes at him. "It depends on how much of it is directed at me outside of training," Naruto responded back with a frown. "Outside of training?" Ino repeated, as she slowly arched her own brow. "Well, yeah, it would be hard to train together if we didn't get violent, wouldn't it?" he asked in confusion. You just love to give me headaches trying to follow your train of thought, don't you, Naruto-kun?" Ino asked with a grumble before smiling a bit, as Shizen released her arm, leaving her free to grab him by his vest, and pull him down to her level. "And you know what? Are you going to kiss me again?" Naruto asked hesitantly, as he stared at her wide-eyed, and blinking. "Well, she does have a nice grip for it. Very firm, and assertive," Shizen agreed, as she checked on first Kin, then Tamari, before moving to treat the captives. "Just right to pull you into one whenever she's ready for it." "Hey, you just going to let her get away with it, Naruto-sama?" Tamari asked, smiling innocently back at Naruto. "I mean, with everything else letting her take charge from you? You'll start giving Kin-chan here so many ideas about how easy you are." "Why would Kin start to say, suspiciously, before blinking a bit, and suddenly smiling viciously. "Yeah, you're right. I mean, how can I expect him to handle me when he's letting the little princess wrap him about her finger?" "Hey, wait a minute," Ino sputtered, as she stared back at the pair, eyes wide. "Of course, it is Naruto-sama," Kin continued with a melodramatic sight. "I bet he couldn't even grab her, and kiss the hell out of her if he tried." Naruto stared at Kin for a moment, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, he definitely isn't the type that could handle grabbing her by her hair, pressing her body back into him, his hand at the small of her back, rubbing lower, as he brought her lips to his." Tamari agreed even, as she fought the urge to slowly lick her lips at the thought. Ino stared back at her, her mouth hanging open, as her face flushed bright crimson. "They're trying to, bait me into kissing Ino like that, aren't they, Shizen-chan?" Naruto asked plainly, as Kin and Tamari both grinned broadly back at him. "Well, yes, and I'm very proud of you for recognizing it," Shizen agreed with a beaming smile before coming up behind him, and whispering in his ear so only he could hear. "So shut up, and do just what they told you, and make them wish it was them you were kissing." And then she was smiling brightly again, as she clapped her hands together. "Was there anything else?" Naruto blinked, stared at Shizen for a moment, looked at the still blushing Ino, and again felt the swelling disregard that had blossomed inside of him that morning bubbling up. With a tilt of his head, he suddenly grabbed hold of Ino's hair, and pulled the girl close, her lips suddenly hovering about his own, as she let out a startled eep. Then, as her eyes grew wide, she could feel the way her body was pressed into his hand catching the small of her back, her hips pressing into his, as she caught his shoulders reflexively to steady herself. As Tamari and Kin started with open-mouthed disbelief, and no small amount of envy, Naruto then pulled Ino into a kiss. They watched, as Ino went stiff for only a moment in shocked disbelief before she relaxed into his arms, and wrapped herself tightly into him. And when her eyes fell shut, and the moan left her lips, they looked at one another, and groaned, as they almost simultaneously caught their faces in their palms. Shizen beamed happily, before the return to her work, making sure that the captives were properly started on healing while she kept her chakra conserved before they got to the hospital. Again, she was once more thankful that Tsunade had decided to return to Konoha. Things were definitely much more interesting now than they had been on the road. Tsunade sighed softly, as the final Naruto clone dispersed, informing her that Naruto had successfully accomplished his mission, and had in fact rendezvoused with Shizen's patrol team. With that news came the information that the Uchiha, along with 2 of Orochimaru's elites, had been successfully captured alive. In addition, the sound extraction team had suffered 2 fatal casualties, both apparently inflicted by Naruto, and because of how he'd eliminated the second, via demonic chakra infusion, Genma Shiranu was remaining on site in order to keep the bodies secure until a proper retrieval team of their own could be dispatched to safely retrieve the tainted corpses. All this, after the earlier drama and stress of the tedious operation she'd been forced to give to one Rock Lee. Thankfully, the boy had survived with promising potential for a full recovery. Guy had certainly been happy enough. Still, this was going to be a political mess. She just knew that somewhere those bastard Uchiha were smirking at her, as somehow, that the last of the Uchiha still managed to give her a massive headache. She was fairly certain that it wasn't intentional, simply genetic. The Uchiha had been bred to piss off Senju by their mere presence alone for centuries, after all. Now, however, she had to figure out just how to spin this, how to handle it. Unfortunately, her own knowledge of Konoha's internal politics was woefully outdated. That meant dealing with the sensei's former teammates. Joy. Orochimaru frowned slightly. As he leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowed into slits behind the heavy bandages wrapped about his face. They failed. It would appear so, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto agreed, as he crossed his good arm about his chest, and bowed to the man. Your orders? It is an irritating delay, Orochimaru stated simply, as he leaned back, his eyes still slitted. So many things have been irritating lately. Kabuto remained silent, as he watched, and waited, the light catching his glasses just so it completely obscured his eyes. Kimimaro? Orochimaru asked simply, as he arched a brow back at Kabuto. He was most distraught to learn that you'd been forced to take on a substandard new body. Kabuto said simply, his eyes unreadable. He almost took it upon himself to attempt to aid the sound for. Of course he did, Orochimaru stated simply, a dry amusement in his tone. And I'm sure you convinced him that it would be in his best interests to remain where he was. Yours, actually, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto stated simply. Of course, Orochimaru agreed, his eyes suddenly twinkling. And it would have nothing to do with the fact that you are now in need of a replacement for what your dear friend, Naruto-kun, took from you? It would be in your best interest for you to have as many capable individuals at your disposal as possible, Kabuto responded neutrally. In my current state, I am hardly at my most capable. And of course Kimimaro-kun just happened to offer up a replacement. Orochimaru agreed with a cold smirk growing over his lips. He was quite adamant that we act in your best interests, Orochimaru-sama. I believe he proclaimed his entire being willing to sacrifice for your ambitions if need be, Kabuto stated blandly. I simply pointed out that I would not be at the peak of my ability to aid those ambitions due to the setback I encountered. And you were planning on seeing if you could make use of some of the techniques I developed for Shimura-san, Orochimaru noted with another smirk. My, so ruthless, Kabuto-kun. So manipulative. Whatever it takes to best serve, Kabuto said simply, as he tilted his head to the side, and studied Orochimaru for a moment. After all, I made the choice so long ago, did I not? So you did, Orochimaru agreed, chuckling again, as he would frown slightly. Well, I suppose we'll have to wait, and see exactly what happened with Sasuke-chan. If she was caught, then it would simply be a matter of finding the appropriate time to liberate her. If she wasn't, then it is still only a matter of time before she comes to me. And either way works out to your benefit, Kabuto started with a quiet murmur. Orochimaru-sama. As long as we don't take too long in retrieving her, Orochimaru agreed with a smirk. Fortunately, it shouldn't take me too terribly long to become familiar enough with this body to fetch her, either way. Of course, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto agreed with a simple nod of his head. Tsunade sat quietly, leaning back in her seat, as she took a long, slow look, glancing between her teacher's former teammates before she lightly steepled her fingers together. As she spoke, would the respected elders please repeat what they just said? If they were intimidated by the woman before them, either showed it in the slightest, but they were among the few remaining veterans of earliest shinobi wars. As much as she herself had seen, the two in front of her had seen even more. They had been trained by both her grandfather and her granduncle, and while they might respect her to a degree, she is still fresh to her position. I wish I could say that I did not misspeak, Hokage-sama, Kohara stated quietly, as she stared unflinchingly back at Tsunade. However, the fact of the matter is, Hokage-sama, we fear exactly how Itachi Uchiha-san will react to the death of his little sister, Hamura finished for his teammate, as he bowed his head quietly. And we are still firmly in his debt for the burden that was unfortunately placed upon him. And Sensei went along with this plan? Tsunade asked with a flat look, as she stared back at the two of them. No, Kohara stated simply with a shake of her head. Another interested party approached Itachi-san, and initiated the end of their coup. Sarutobi-sama was purposely kept unaware, until after the blade had fallen, Tsunade started with cold eyes, boring back into the pair. Danzo. Neither responded to her words, letting the silence speak for itself. While I can understand the position you were in, there was a pause, as she slowly leaned forward, her eyes locked upon them both, if only barely. The authority you held under Sarutobi-sama will not be extended any further. We accept this, Hamura stated softly, as he bowed his head in acknowledgement. Will we be allowed to reclaim our honor? Tsunade stared at them both for a moment, lips pursed, as she stared at them, temptation flashing across her eyes before she leaned back again. If Sensei did not feel that it would be an appropriate response when the affront was to him, then I will honor his decision. I will not be so forgiving. They nodded quietly in acceptance before Koharu asked simply, And Shimura-san? Her eyes narrowed only the barest fractions of an inch at that question before she tilted his head to the side. He will be stepping away from any AL involvement in any armed force, shinobi, civilian or otherwise, immediately. They looked at one another before looking back at Tsunade, and nodding their heads in acceptance. Seeing this, Tsunade nodded slightly in turn, before looking back at the honored elders. Then what remains is to decide what is to be done with her. Koharu and Hamura looked at each other for a moment before looking back at Tsunade, as Koharu spoke up. There is always the solution that Sarutobi-sama implemented with the Kazekage's daughter. You want me to put an unstable, intelligent, highly trained, and violent kunoichi into the care of a who already has the responsibility to look after two formerly hostile nin, said Kunoichi's former teammate, who was promoted over her, which, given her instability, would likely only antagonize her when she finds out, and whose girlfriend was the one responsible for apprehending her in a particularly vicious manner? Tsunade asked, as she looked back at Koharu. Is that the solution you would be referring to? I don't know, it could work. A new voice cut in, drawing their attention to the figure of Jiraiya perched in the window, watching them, as he slowly sipped on a saucer of sake. Potentially. Potentially? Tsunade looked at him, her eyes narrowed into slits. And tell me, Jiraiya, how do you plan to potentially figure out how your little seal will interact with Orochimaru? Testing, he said with a shrug of his shoulders, and another sip of his sake. I would humbly advise against using the Uchiha as a test subject, Hokage-sama, as it would be unpleasant should something prove incompatible, Hamura said quietly, his head bowed politely in turn. Agreed, Tsunade said simply even, as she lightly tapped her finger upon the desk, as she stared at the notes she'd been taking while the clones had relayed to her exactly what had occurred. There is, however, another potential test subject. One of Orochimaru's elite? Jiraiya asked, the light strain of sarcasm in his voice hissing over his sake before he sipped again at his sake. You do realize if we do this, Naruto will be stuck with them, correct? Wouldn't it be simple enough to dispose of them once the process has been verified as viable, Hokage-sama? Koharu asked with her head bowed. Not in the long run, Tsunade stated, as she continued tapping at her desk. If we could do so without Naruto's knowledge, then it would be a simple matter. However, we don't have another available to use to test this and, from what I understand, it is a very involved process. The two elders glanced at each other before looking back at their Hokage, making no expression, as they sat there, heads bowed. You find objection to this? Tsunade stated, as she again steepled her fingers together. We mean no offense, Hokage-sama, but to act with such favoritism towards a single ninja. Hamura spoke with a wary hesitance. Oh? You mean like how favoritism has been shown every day in this village for the past 13 years? Tsunade asked curiously, as she tilted her head to the side. Would you please explain to me where the issue comes from for showing favoritism to the ninja who stopped the unleashed might of the Ichibi without a single casualty? Something that was previously handled by the Yondaime Kazekage with nowhere near as low a casualty rate? Tsunade paused, as she would tilt her head to the side. Or perhaps you're referring to showing favoritism towards the Uzumaki? The clan considered the greatest ally of Konoha? The one whose clan symbol is still emblazoned on a Jounin's vest, as a sign of the importance of our village? Or could it be you're objecting to showing favoritism to the son of Minato Namikaze, when the grandson of Hiruzen Sarutobi received infinitely more consideration? Tsunade paused a moment before she slowly let an icy stare bore into the pair. But perhaps the favoritism you're referring to is towards when he spent his whole life ostracized, and living, as a pariah where his father's final wish was ignored. Honored elders? Lesser men and women would have flinched beneath the accusation in those words, but the two elders merely bowed their heads quietly in acceptance of the words. As you say, Hokage-sama, would it be unreasonable to ask about binding her to the sauna then, as a compromise then? Since he will be appearing, as part of the delegation for finalizing the terms of our new treaty? Koharu asked with a quiet tone. From what I understand, he would not be, as adverse to the summary disposal. Unfortunately his seal is of highly inferior design, Jiraiya stated simply with a light grimace. There's a chance because of it that they could be unleashed by the process. I had already considered that possibility. And we do not have the current political clout to reasonably barter with Taki, and Mist Hamura murmured softly, as his eyes took beneath his glasses. I see we have no choice then? We can kill the Uchiha, as a traitor, Tsunade stated bluntly. Which would be my preference. As you say, Hokage-sama. Kohara bowed her head quietly. If I might be so bold, there are rumors of a potential alliance between the Uzumaki and the Yamanaka. Tsunade paused for a moment before pulling out a bottle of sake, and suddenly smirking, as she poured herself a saucer. I believe, given current circumstances, that it will not be unreasonable that there will be a revival of the Uzumaki. She paused, lifting up a saucer of sake to her lips, as she gave them a look. However, there will be no encouragement until the girls are all of safe breeding age. May we humbly ask if the Hokage-sama is planning to make this a personal project? Hamura asked carefully. He Tsunade started with a light chuckle before letting it grow into a maniacal peal of laughter that even Orochimaru would be jealous of. I think you can take that as a yes, Jiraiya noted dryly. It was some time later that again found the Hokage's office occupied, this time, instead of the two honored elders sitting in the seats before her, Naruto and his girls were on one side, while Genma and Shizen were on the other, with Anko and Yugago standing curiously behind them. Well, since Kakashi and Asuma are both on assignment, I'll begin. Earlier today, rookie Genin Sasuke Uchiha attempted defection to the village of Hidden Sound, and Orochimaru, Tsunade stated, as she looked over the vague report of the incident she'd been able to put together. Her attempt was discovered by her teammate, rookie Genin Sakura Haruno, who managed to alert their third teammate, rookie Naruto Uzumaki. While assuring the safety of Haruno, who had been injured by Uchiha, Uzumaki sent out two contingents of shadow clones, one group to pursue and either subdue or delay the Uchiha, the other to report the events. Upon learning of the situation from Haruno, and ensuring she was stable enough, he created a third contingent of clones to watch her before pursuing the Uchiha with the enlisted aid of rookie Genin Ino Yamanaka, and his own personal retainers, designated Spoils Kin and Tamari. She paused there before glancing at Naruto and the three girls. Are there any discrepancies in this statement you wish to report? Naruto glanced for a moment towards Ino before slowly shaking his head towards Tsunade. No, but Sakura-chan might have more to add. Haruno will be debriefed at a later time once she's been fully cleared by the hospital, Tsunade said simply. You four then engaged in pursuit, and eventually found the Uchiha rendezvousing with a group of Sound Nin approximately 2 miles due north of Konoha. Their identities are known, I understand? Kin stepped forward at that prompting, and bowed her head. Yes, Hokage-sama. They are known as the Four Sounds, Jirubu of the South Gate, Kidomaru of the East Gate, Tayuya of the North Gate, and Sakan of the West Gate. Originally they were known as the Sound Five until Kimimaro retired from their team for unknown reasons. Tsunade nodded her head, as Kin stepped back, and made a mark in her notes. And the previously dispatched Naruto clones had engaged the group the Uchiha, and the Sound Nin, eliminating a summons, and damaging 2 of the Sound Nin. In your initial assault, Uzumaki eliminated 1 of the Sound Nin via. Naruto shifted uncomfortably at the statement, while all 4 of the senior Nin assembled gave him a variety of different looks. Most notable was the look of shock then rueful shaking of his head on Genma's face. Anko merely smirked, and Yugago gave Naruto an unreadable expression. Shizen simply shot him a look of sympathetic understanding. Said Nin was identified as? Tsunade prompted, as she looked at Naruto and Kin. He had 6 arms? Naruto glanced at Kin. Kidomaru, Kin supplied. Very well, Tsunade said with a nod of her head, and another notation, then you split up to handle the remainder of the opposing forces. From what I understand, Yamanaka was the one who confronted the Uchiha. Yes, Hokage-sama, Ino said, feeling suddenly rather nervous, as she shifted slightly in her place, and, from all reports, successfully subdued her. Tsunade stated simply with a nod of her head. Her? Naruto couldn't help but blurt out, staring at Tsunade. Naruto! Ino hissed, and elbowed him lightly in the ribs. Weren't you paying attention? But Sasuke is a girl? Naruto repeated, staring around, as he looked around him, and noted the bemused look on Anko's face. You knew, brat, everyone knew, but your generation. No one else would have been fooled by that weak little, Anko started with a smirk. Until recently her business was hers. She wanted to pretend to have an outie instead of an innie, but that was her business. But Naruto stared, mouth hanging open. She saw me naked. Ino stared at him, while the various adults all began to snort and chuckle in amusement at his reaction. Behind him, Tamari and Kin smirked at one another. Tsunade, however, merely palmed her face in her hand, and sighed. Can we please get back to the debriefing now? Tsunade asked with a slight hint of annoyance in her voice. You can talk about the Uchiha's lechery later. Of course, Tsunade-sama. We'll leave those thoughts about how the Uchiha obviously lusted after Naruto-kun's body in our heads where they belong, Shizen agreed, smiling innocently back at her master. Naruto went pale at the words, staring straight ahead, a slight trickle of sweat trailing down the side of his face. Thank you so much, Shizen, Tsunade stated sarcastically before looking back at Ino. During your fight you cracked multiple bones in the Uchiha's body, specifically, her hands and ribs. On top of that you slashed the tendons in the back of her ankles, and concussed her. Does that sound accurate? Yes? Ino offered hesitantly. I can confirm those are the injuries I documented the Uchiha was suffering from, Tsunade-sama. Shizen agreed with a nod of her head before sighing sadly. I'm afraid I was unable to sufficiently repair her tendons. I'm afraid that she'll have to wear heels wherever she's led around. I can't express the full depths of how I feel about the situation. Duly noted, Tsunade stated dryly, as she lightly gave her apprentice a look before looking back at Ino. Why were you the one to confront the Uchiha? Naruto started to speak up, only to be silenced by the feel of Ino's heel digging into his foot, as she took a deep breath before speaking. The Uchiha was visibly exhausted, and nowhere near top form. I was fresh, I had a decent understanding of my skills compared to hers, and I knew that Orochimaru wouldn't have sent weak need to secure her. The Uchiha was the weakest of the enemy combatants, and I was the weakest among our squad. I was confident that even if I failed to defeat the Uchiha myself, I could disable her enough to make capture viable when one of the others finished with their opponents. I see, Tsunade said with a vague nod of her head before looking at Naruto. Chunin Uzumaki, why did you leave the task of retrieving the target of your impromptu mission to Yamanaka? Huh? Why wouldn't I? I mean, yeah, I wanted to smash Sasuke's face in for what she did to Sakura-chan, but I knew Ino could handle it with Sasuke like that. Naruto scratched his chin in confusion. I mean, that's what you've got to do when you split up a team, right? Trust your comrades can handle it, and if she had failed? Tsunade asked bluntly. Naruto glanced nervously towards Ino before looking pleadingly at Tsunade, who only gave him a look, forcing him to admit, I had a few clones watching the fight. Tsunade nodded in satisfaction at that. Good. Your abilities with the shadow clone technique give you a unique ability to be involved in multiple aspects of a mission. I suggest you remember to keep making use of it. Right, Gran, he began to answer before a trickle of killing intent, and a glare quickly forced him to correct himself. Hokage-sama? Better, she agreed with a grunt. From what I understand, your two spoils then each engaged one of the remaining enemy nin, designated the sound for? Kin looked towards Naruto questioningly, who stared at her for a moment in confusion before realizing she was actually waiting for his permission to speak, and gave a quick nod of his head. Yes, Hokage-sama. I engaged Tayuya of the North Gate, and Tamari engaged Jirabu of the South Gate, Kin stated simply, as she looked straight ahead towards the Hokage. When I finished with Tayuya, Jounin-sen intervened to convey the preference of a live prisoner over a dead one, with the relative distance from Konoha. I can confirm her statement, Genma agreed with a nod of his head. I gave basic medical attention, and secured the prisoner before I then helped Tamari-san subdue her opponent without having to resort to more severe damage that would have left him less viable for interrogation. Tamari shrugged a bit. I'm limited on what I can do without a battle fan, otherwise I would have crushed him straight from the start. Which leaves Sakan of the West Gate fighting Uzumaki, Tsunade stated, as she again turned her attention to Naruto. Sakan, and Yukon, Naruto corrected after a moment, as he shifted a bit, the memories of their final moments suddenly pounding down into his mind. There were two of them. They shared the same body except when they didn't. They could do something with their bodies, their cells, heal themselves, and also get into other people's bodies. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at his statement. I see. And how did you defeat them? The second one, Yukon, after they did that freaky grow horns, and looked all crazy, got into my body, and was talking about ripping me apart from the inside, Naruto said slowly, before looking away, and down towards the ground. So, I used some of the chakra. Tsunade's eyes flicked towards Ino, who showed no surprise at the statement, and whose hand found Naruto's, and gave it a subtle squeeze of affirmation. She watched, as Naruto almost seemed to pull away from that contact for a moment before gently squeezing back, and continuing. He started screaming, and separated from my body. The first one, Sakan, yelled at me, then I guess tried to pull him into his body to save him. Naruto paused for a moment, and then lifted his head, and looked into Tsunade's eyes. That's when he started screaming at him. That's when Proctor-san showed up, and told me I needed to watch. So, I watched them die, and it was horrible. Very well, Tsunade started softly, and nodded her head in understanding. Specialist Shiranui, do you have anything to add? They did good, Gemma started with a laconic shrug of his shoulders. Not much else I can say. They each took on a specific section of the mission, and completed them all successfully. A bit more ruthlessness in some cases than I'm used to for brats, but, considering the circumstances of who they are, understandable. Though someone needs to get sunshine, there is some more variety to her skill set. Damn it, another one? Tamari hissed with a grumble of distaste, as her nickname was mentioned by Genma. Specialist Mitarashi, I understand you've been personally overseeing Yamanaka's training along with Operative Yuzuki? Tsunade turned her attention to Anko, and Yugao, her brow arched up in question. With the approval of her instructor, Asuma Sarutobi? Yes, Hokage-sama, Anko agreed with a nod, and a proud grin, and a nod of her head. Very well, Tsunade nodded her head. Yamanaka is hereby transferred from Team 10 to Specialist Mitarashi's direct command. Her training will continue under Operative Yuzuki, barring availability for missions. Ino Yamanaka is hereby granted a probationary field promotion to the rank of, pending full review in 2 months' time. Any objections? Both Anko and Ino's jaws dropped, as they stared at Tsunade, their eyes the size of saucers, as Ino found her voice first. But what about Shikamaru, Choji, and Team 10? Team 7 is being fully disbanded, Tsunade stated simply. Obviously Sasuke Uchiha will not be returning to the ranks of active ninja. Given the situation, Kakashi Hataki's duties as an instructor are suspended pending a full investigation. As such, Sakura Haruna will be joining Team 10 while Naruto Uzumaki will be serving apprenticeship to Jiraiya. That sounds appropriate, Yugugo noted with a nod of her head, before lightly tapping her chin thoughtfully. We still get to play with Uzumaki-kun though, don't we? Tsunade stared at her for a moment. Play? Cut my clothes to ribbons while I'm still in them, Naruto answered, as he stared dazedly ahead before staring at Tsunade. But Team 7? Sakura-chan, the Uchiha destroyed your team, Tsunade stated simply, as she shook her head. I won't have another on my hands. We have enough issues from the originals, as is. You're a, Naruto muttered petulantly. Hence why I know what I'm talking about, she stated with a flat finality, and a glare. Your apprenticeship to Jiraiya was already assured. Did you really think you were still going to be on Team 7 after your promotion, and that? Yes? Naruto said, still visibly in a daze. Well, now you know better, she stated firmly. Will Haruno be allowed to continue her training with Ti? Anko asked, as she finally found her voice again. I kinda put a lot of effort into that. I see no reason to discontinue that state of affairs, Tsunade stated simply. Now, Shizen, please escort everyone, but Uzumaki out of my office. Of course, Hokage-sama, Shizen bowed her head, and then carefully guided everyone, but Naruto out of the office, Ino, Kin, and Tamari all showing a great deal of reluctance in leaving his side. Once it was just the two of them, Tsunade pointed to one of the chairs. Take a seat, brat. We need to have a talk. Ino stumbled home with a look of dazed shock glossing over her eyes, as she found herself collapsing at her kitchen table, and staring ahead. My, had an eventful day, princess? Inoichi asked with a smile on his face, as he settled into a seat at the table himself. Sasuke went traitor, Ino stated tonelessly. I was on the retrieval team. Inoichi froze in place before looking quickly over at her. Are you alright, sweetheart? I'm fine, Ino stated, as she continued to stare ahead before absently commenting. I was the one who fought her. Her? Inoichi asked warily, as stared back at Ino. Sasuke, she said bluntly. She was exhausted, worn out, and at her limit. But I still beat her. Messed her up, in fact. She hurt Sakura. I slashed the tendons in her ankles. Hit her a couple of times, she wouldn't go down, so I smashed her ribs, and then smashed her face into my knee. Inoichi nodded slowly, as he waited for her to continue. I kissed Naruto, Ino stated, as well, staring forward, full on the lips. He took a deep, sharp breath, and focused on keeping himself calm. With tongue. For a moment he stared at her, before standing up. I'll go get your mother. She nodded simply, still staring ahead, before she spoke up, as he walked away. Oh, and I got promoted. Probationary. And I've been moved off of Team 10 to an apprenticeship under Anko. And the sake, Inoichi added, as he rubbed his face, struggling against the urge to groan out loud. Warm, please, Ino said faintly, causing Inoichi to open his mouth to rebuke her, only to let it click shut when he remembered what all she told him. It was several moments later that Ino found her mother stepping into the kitchen with a bemused look on her face. Your father said you needed to talk to me? I take it this is about Naruto-kun. You know I thought I knew things this morning. I was Ino Yamanaka, genin of Konoha, member of Team 10, who needed to apologize to her potential boyfriend for being an idiot, Ino stated dully. And now? Her mother asked curiously, as she took a seat across from her unusually subdued daughter. Now I'm Ino Yamanaka, probationary of Konoha, apprentice to Anko Mitarashi, girlfriend to Naruto Uzumaki, And of the, Ino answered, as she continued to stare blankly forward. The girl who beat Sasuke Uchiha unconscious, who she thought was a guy, and used to have a crush on. Ah, I see. Her mother agreed with a nod of her head. That is a lot to take in. I understand you also kissed your new boyfriend. I believe your father mentioned something about tongue? Ino could hear the arch of her mother's brow in her tone, but she barely reacted to it, as she nodded her head. Yeah, and it was really good too. Even better when he kissed me later. Ah, young love, her mother agreed with a nod of her head, and a smile. So, he told you about it? And you found out about Uchiha-san's true gender? She went traitor, and we dragged her back. Ino agreed with a nod. Naruto told me about this before we got to the fight. I hope you understand how much trust he's putting in you then, her mother stated with a nod, before suddenly crossing her arms about her chest. Now, what's this I hear about Sake? I've had a really long day, Ino asked hopefully. And I made it? Probationary according to you, her mother countered back. That's gotta count for something, she argued back. You can have either the sake or free reign to make out with your boyfriend, but you don't get both, her mother stated simply, and arched a brow back at her. Damn it, Ino cursed softly, and glared just a bit at her mother. You don't play fair, I'm your mother. I stopped playing fair the moment I knew I was pregnant with you. There was a brief silence in the air, as Tsunade leaned back in her chair before she spoke. Jiraiya, get in here, and stop eavesdropping. For a moment there was nothing but silence, before suddenly the air rippled and distorted, and Jiraiya suddenly appeared leaning against the wall. You knew I was going to be here anyway, so I would hardly call it eavesdropping. Take off the hat already, it's just us, and the brat. I don't remember you talking to Sensei that way, Tsunade stated with narrowed eyes, as she glared slightly at him. I never saw Sensei puke all over themselves the first time he got drunk, he countered back with a slight smirk. And you didn't see how I talked to him after you left. She glared for only a moment at him before shaking her head. Moving on, take a seat, brat. Naruto glanced warily between her and Jiraiya. Take the seat, brat, you'll need it, Jiraiya advised with a nod towards the seat in front of the Hokage's desk. Warily he took a seat, again keeping his eyes bouncing between them. What's going on? There were issues regarding how we could properly handle your former teammate, she said simply, as she leaned back in her chair, her hands pressing together, index fingers paired together, and lightly tapping her lower lip. As such, neither of the typical solutions are ideal. That's an understatement, Jiraiya started with a snort, gaining a questioning look from Naruto. There were things going on that weren't really what they seemed to be, brat. You mean like Kakashi's hole underneath the underneath thing? Naruto asked, perking up slightly. Yes, Tsunade stated simply, cutting off anything Jiraiya could say in response. Because of it, the Uchiha has to have certain considerations taken in regards to her. She's not going to get away with it, is she? Naruto asked with a frown, his eyes narrowed into slits. She hurt Sakura-chan. There's no way she can just get away with that. She's not going to be a ninja again, no matter what, Tsunade assured him, nor will she go free. That's not in the cards. Then what? And why am I here? Naruto suddenly felt an itching little sensation in the back of his head, one that was telling him that there was something he really should be remembering. Something very, very important to the current situation. I suggested a compromise, Jiraiya stated simply, his lips twitching just a bit. The alarm bells were screaming now, as he stared back at the smirking man who stood in front of him, arms crossed about his chest, before he turned towards Tsunade. After he said that, can I just say no? You could, Tsunade agreed with a nod, as she lightly tapped her lips. You'd be potentially endangering the entire village, but you can refuse. Wait, what? Naruto demanded, as he straightened up straight. Well, not only will we have to deal with the repercussions of either killing or imprisoning the traitor, she said blandly, as she glanced out through her window to the village behind her, but we'd also have to deal with the loss of prestige and no longer having the Uchiha available to us. After the invasion, there would be those who thought it would be proof that the ninja of the leaf had grown soft and had become easy targets. But, he protested, as the gears started to grind in his head. That's not fair. That's life, brat, Jiraiya stated blandly. Sometimes you have to do the best you can with the crap hand you're dealt. Damn it, what do I have to do? Naruto glared slightly, as he slumped back, and glowered back at them. Don't slouch, it's bad posture, Tsunade stated absently, as she slowly flipped through a folder in front of her before looking back at him. It's simple. We need you to help attempt the effectiveness of Jiraiya's seal against those created by Orochimaru. Starting with this Tayuya and, if effective, moving on to the Uchiha. Naruto stared at her, his mouth hanging open, before he practically shouted out, What? I don't believe I need to repeat myself, Tsunade stated simply, as she continued to glance through her folder. Upon proven effectiveness of the seal on sound 4-member Tayuya, you'll repeat the procedure. A shame we couldn't get you a nice brunette, then you'd have a full spread of variety, Jiraiya noted sadly before sighing melodramatically. Alas, you'll just have to settle for 2 blondes, 2 raven hairs, and a redhead. But... Naruto's eyes were wide, as he stared back at them. Ino-chan will kill me. Kin-chan will kill me. And Sunshine? Jiraiya asked with a bemused twinkle in his eyes. She'll laugh her ass off, Naruto said blandly, as his shoulders slumped. Women love a man that can make them laugh, Jiraiya noted with an innocent smile. You're telling them, Granny, Naruto stated defiantly, as he crossed his arms about his chest. Oh? I am? She asked, as she simply arched her brow, and gave him a flat look. Yes, because no way they'll believe me if I tell them, Naruto agreed, not backing down in the slightest. I could tell them, Jiraiya offered, the innocent smile he wore only growing in size. If he's going to, I refuse, Naruto stated flatly, not even looking at him. Understandable, Tsunade agreed, unable to stop the small smirk that cracked her lips at the comment. I suppose I can inform your girlfriend, and your spoils that you are taking on another pair of spoils, despite the fact that you already have them. That's totally not what's going on, and you know it, Naruto declared with a glare. You're forcing me into this. It's all about presentation, Tsunade stated simply, as she arched her brow. If you have a problem with it, you can always just tell them yourself. Naruto glared at her in response, as he crossed his arms about his chest. Well, you're all evil. Every last one of you, Naruto stated firmly with a nod of his head, and another glare. Kid, you don't know the half of it, Jiraiya said with a chuckle, reaching down, and lightly ruffling Naruto's hair. Evil, he repeated petulantly. As Naruto sulked in his seat, Tsunade took a moment to stare at the contents of one of the other folders in front of her. She'd followed a whim, and a hunch. The results stared back at her from the page in front of her. It wouldn't change the course of action, but hopefully it would make it more acceptable. She glanced again towards Naruto before carefully closing the folder, and settling forward, and watching, as Jiraiya amused himself at the boy's expense. Hope, after all, sprung eternal. Beyond the office, as Ino walked off in a daze along with a smirking Anko, and a visibly bemused Yugugo, Tamari, and Kin leaned against the wall standing next to one another, both staring towards the door to the Hokage's office. What do you think they're talking about? Kin asked after a few minutes of silence when it became obvious that Naruto would not immediately reappear. Well, either us, or something we won't like, Tamari noted with a shrug of her shoulders. Maybe even both. But we just kicked ass, Kin protested quickly. We took down some of Orochimaru's elites. We accomplished the mission. And now what? Tamari countered back, as she pulled out one of her fans, and began to twist it about her wrist with a pulse of her chakra. What happens from here? What happens to the Uchiha? She's put down like the rabid bitch she is, Kin stated simply with a shrug of her shoulder. Simple. She's one of the 2 last Uchiha, Tamari countered back, as she snapped her fan back into her palm. So? She's already run to Orochimaru once, she'll just try to do it again if they let her live. Do you think they'll just let him slither into her body, and get her Sharingan? Kin responded irritably, as she tapped her finger against the wall. Tamari stared at her for a moment, before slowly rubbing her face lightly. Okay, right, you didn't grow up in a real ninja village. Kin opened her mouth to object, before it clicked shut, and she glared lightly back at her. So? What about it? There are 3 clan names that made the shinobi world tremble. These are some of the bigger reasons that Konoha has remained, as the village. The one all the other major villages look at with respect, envy, jealousy, and fear. Uchiha is one of those names. If Konoha no longer has the blood of that clan inside its walls, she trailed off, shrugging her shoulders. It's not a fatal or even a crippling blow, but it is still a pretty big blow to their reputation. Wait, you can't possibly mean? Kin stared at her, before quickly shaking her head. He couldn't, he wouldn't. I mean, she just became a traitor. She attacked his other teammate. So? Ginma cut in, chuckling in amusement where he watched the pair, twisting between his lips. Weight of benefits against consequences, helping Konoha save face, and maintain the appearance of its strength, against his discomfort. But Kin started to protest immediately. Trey, when she paused, and shifted slightly in uncomfortable realization, Genma smirked quietly back at her. Traitors should be killed? Kin glowered back at him, crossing her arms about her chest, and bowing her head towards her chest. Technically, to Konoha, you're a defector, not a traitor, Tamari stated helpfully, as she smirked back at Kin. And weren't you going to be killed? I don't need you making his point for him, Kin snapped back with a glare. This doesn't bother you at all? The whole situation bothers me, Tamari stated pointedly, as she flicked her collar. However, unlike you, and the Uchiha, I'm not a traitor. Nope, you're just such a ray of sunshine that went along with the plot to betray your allies, and commit mass slaughter of civilians, Genma noted with a slight pursing of his lips. That was sound, not us, Tamari growled back, her eyes narrowing slightly. We don't slaughter civilians like that. Right. Because we all know unleashing it in the middle of a village isn't going to cause massive civilian casualties. Gemma started with a flat look straight into her eyes. She flinched at that, her eyes falling, as she couldn't meet his stare. Thought so, Genma nodded his head, as he twisted the lightly between his lips. Just figured I'd remind you, to us, you're not really much better. She at least accepts it, best you do the same. Plus, righteous indignation is better left to the professionals, Shizen stated seriously, as she looked at the pair. You can talk to Shizen-san if you want to get the lessons, and licensing, Genma agreed with a nod. I'm sure she'll be happy to make sure you're properly trained. Now, Shirane-san, you wouldn't be implying something, now would you? Shizen asked sweetly, as a fixed smile plastered across her lips. Tamari and Kin glanced at each other before the sound of the office door opening reached them, and they saw their master walking out of the Hokage's office, shoulders slumped, and head bowed. So that's bad, huh? Tamari noted, as she lightly squinted at Naruto, pushing down the feelings of guilt and unease she was feeling. Guess she told you that you have to take the Uchiha as a spoil too? His shoulders immediately slumped even further, as his chin fell onto his chest. Guess so, she stated, as Kin's eyes narrowed in outrage. And the other one? The one Kin-chan fought, he stated blandly. What? Kin demanded, her eyes growing the size of saucers, before she whirled around and pointed at a bemused Genma. This is all your fault. Keep telling yourself that, Genma chuckled, as he dangled from his lips with a light glint to his eyes. Now, Genma-kun, no need to be so modest, Shizen stated, as she looked at the man with narrowed eyes. Modest, Shizen-san? Genma arched her brow. But weren't you the mission leader for our little rendezvous? You do realize I know it's Granny, and the super pervert's fault, right? Naruto stated flatly, as he gave the pair a glare before looking around. Where's Ino-chan? She went off with Anko, and Yugago. I think she's still in shock, Genma noted with a chuckle, as he reached down and ruffled Naruto's hair. Congrats by the way, kid. Oh, before I forget, Tsunade's voice cut in from the office. Sunshine's brothers will be here shortly to pick up the new treaty for ratification. Shizen, take the brat, and the girls go meet them. Kankuro, and Gaara? Tamari's eyes widened, and she took a step back. But wait, do they know about it? And we've got to? Sucks to be you, kid, Genma noted with a chuckle before he turned, and waved over his shoulder. Have fun meeting Sunshine's family. And suddenly so glad I'm an orphan, Kin muttered before suddenly freezing in place, as a realization hit her. Wait, isn't your brother an insane, murderous, and incredibly powerful psychopath? Yes, Tamari agreed with a nod. He's not that bad, Naruto protested, gaining a pair of incredulous looks. He's not, and isn't the Uchiha's brother an insane, murderous ninja who's powerful enough to fight them? Kin continued, as she gave them both a look. Yes? Naruto agreed cautiously. I mean he, and Fish Guy did run away, but, S-rank missing Nin, Kin stated, as she stared at Naruto for a moment. When did this thing turn into a damn death sentence? We're not going to die, Kin-chan, Naruto said irritably, as he gave her a look. How the hell can you say that? Kin demanded. Do you not get how many people are going to want to kill us? How many insane and incredibly powerful ninjas will want us dead? And we'll just get strong enough to kick all their asses, and show them that we're not gonna be messed with, he said simply. Come on, let's go see Gaara. And what's his name already? But, Kin protested, even, as she let him grab hold of her wrist, and lightly start pulling her along. That's not how it's supposed to work. Well, he's refused to do things how they were supposed to so far, so why change what works now? Tamari muttered with a light daze in her voice, as she robotically followed after the pair. Sasuke sat on cold stone, her aching body practically naked beneath the thin, rough prisoner's smock hanging from her shoulders. She could feel the heavy collar at her throat, chains running perhaps a foot from it to the matching cuffs at her wrists, and the steel bar that connected them one to the other while keeping her hands far apart. From it, another chain ran down, finding a matching bar leading to similar cuffs on her ankles. Not that it mattered, even if she was free of them, she still remembered the slash against the back of her heels, and the pain when she tried to stand. It was fitting really, a constant reminder of her betrayal. She had lost. Again she had lost everything she had left that had mattered to her, that might have mattered to her. This time, though, because she'd thrown them all away, all towards the goal she'd coveted above all else. Now revenge was lost, as well. At best she'd be executed. She hoped for a swift death, but it was rather unlikely. At worst, she'd be thrown somewhere deep and dark, and kept there, rotting, and alone, as they made sure she never saw the light of day, and denied her the escape of death. They'd break her, destroy her, and then leave her to rot to the point where even if somehow she did manage to escape, she'd never be a threat again. And the cold, hard truth was it was all her fault. It had been her failure, her weakness. She had lost to Ino of all people. The only thing that would have been worse would have been losing to Sakura. How could she have fooled herself into thinking she could ever have a chance of fighting him? She let out a bitter, hollow chuckle as she closed her eyes, and curled her body back into itself just enough to allow her to rest her head back against the cold stone within the confines of the chains. Why bother trying to escape? There was no point to it anymore. There was no point to anything. An angry throb of pain dug into her neck from the curse seal, and another flood of thick, sullen emotion poured through her veins. It was funny how easy it had been to ignore the way it felt like oily filth when it rained so easily with her anger, her hatred. It was even funnier how obvious it became with the empty lack of emotion that filled her. So she sat there, alone save for the empty silence surrounding her, and the whispering insistence in her head that she had made the most horrible mistake she ever could. As the time wore on, she found it harder, and harder to find herself coming up with arguments against it. Tayuya felt a wild panic swell up from the primal depths of her soul when she awoke to find herself strapped naked and defenseless to a broad metal table in a sterile white room. No one in sound ever wanted to wake up like this. Ever. She'd done so once before, just after her experience with Orochimaru applying his curse seal to her body. She hadn't been expected to survive, apparently. It was only by a flight of whim and fancy that she'd been released long enough to prove her worth to be a member of the Sound Four that moved her dissection until after he had finished autopsying the bodies of the failures. It had been a constant reminder to her to push herself beyond anything but a position as a valuable member of his elite. This time, though, it wasn't right. It was too sterile, too clean, too bright. Orochimaru always seemed to want to make the shadows loom with what possible horrors they could hold just beyond what you could see, filling the air with the stale scent of fear. And somehow that terrified her more than she imagined possible. "Ah, awake, I see," a coolly detached voice noted from behind. When she strained her neck to catch a glimpse of the source of the voice, she finally noted the thick tube-like gag strapped into her mouth, forcing her jaws almost to the limit they'd opened to. "I'm sure you've probably been in a situation like this before, though probably something darker, I'd imagine. Plenty of deep shadows, things you could almost see, and the like," the voice continued, almost sounding bored from its position just beyond her line of sight. He always did prefer to play it up even more than Jiraiya. Tayuya's eyes widened, as suddenly the heavy click of heels reached her ears, and she could feel the pit in her stomach sink somehow even deeper. "Personally, I always thought he was too impatient for anything else, too eager for results, not willing to take the time to actually follow all the procedures I taught him," Tsunade noted blandly, as she studied the girl. "I mean, really, a combat enhancement that's only viable on 10% of the population, and fatal to the rest? Most of them were probably easily correctable." She wasn't sure which scared her more. Either the fact that, as soon as Orochimaru found out she'd been captured, her dissection was assured, or the legendary medic who had likely taught Orochimaru a great deal of his own knowledge of medical procedure looking at her like she was a particularly vile boil that needed to be lanced. "Tayuya, North Gate of the Sound Four. Summoning and Genjutsu Specialist," Tsunade noted blandly, as she studied the girl with a slight tilt to her head, and a clinical detachment to her voice. One of the only two surviving members of the failed extraction team for Sasuke Uchiha. Tayuya could feel her heart sinking the longer she listened to the woman's words, as the words she was describing sank into her head. Failed extraction. If they had failed, then she was the walking dead. It was all a matter of how painful it would be now, if she was telling the truth. As if reading her mind, Tsunade nodded slightly, as she walked over, and Tayuya could feel the gag being at least temporarily removed before she stepped back into sight again. "Well, at least you don't seem to be completely inept when it comes to individual thought like most of his pets. Most of them would either deny it entirely or believe it completely without doubt. At least that's what information Kins told us. You do remember Kin, don't you?" Anger and fear roared in her veins, as she remembered the girl in question. First, as the weak little girl who'd managed to show just enough ability to get put on a team with Zaku and Dosu, but showed little potential for going any further. Then there was the sadistic, fanged smile, and the gleaming, demonic, blood-red eyes, and that feeling of soul-wrenching fear pouring into her. "I see you do," Tsunade continued with another vague tilt of her head before she slowly opened up a folder and glanced through its contents. "She also remembers you quite well. I think she already expressed the sentiment to you rather adequately, based on the medical reports on the condition you were in when you were captured." "So what, is this the part where you start to fucking cut me open and make me scream?" Tayuya demanded, as she glared back at Tsunade. Dissect me while I'm still fucking alive like Orochimaru-sama likes to do to people that piss him off. Why bother? Tsunade asked with a bored arch of her brow. There would be little point to it, and torture is notoriously unreliable, after all. Ibiki-san, you have heard of him, haven't you? Marino Ibiki-san? He's developed quite the reputation, after all. He can tell you firsthand just how unreliable such methods are. I ain't talking, bitch, she snapped back with more anger than she felt, as she refused to look at the blonde woman in front of her. Do your fucking worst. Really? There was the light sound of the folder shutting before Tayuya felt the lightest touch of a finger touching upon her jaw, and a light touch that somehow forced her head to tilt to look back up at her captor with the apparent lightest of efforts. You see, it's things like that that get little girls like you into trouble. You use your anger as a shield, focus on it, spitting acid, and vitriol out like they'll make you look stronger than you really are. Casually she then lightly trailed her finger down Tayuya's throat, past the jugular, slowly along the center of her body. You think that it makes you tough, will keep you safe. Just below Tayuya's belly button, she pressed forward, just slightly, and suddenly the girl's world exploded into a sea of molten agony, as it felt, as if every nerve in her abdomen convulsed in one single rippling wave of pain. She screamed, helpless, and terrified, as the tears rolled down her cheeks, and her body bucked, and writhed, as much as it could beneath that still, steady, impassive gaze staring down back at her. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pain suddenly cut off into a spasmodic ripple of muscles settling back into place. For future reference, when you're faced with someone who is considered the foremost medical expert in the entire world, one whom even your precious little snake master and his pets acknowledge as knowing more than they do, being able to do things they can't, telling them to do their worst is a very, very foolish thing, Tsunade stated simple, as she picked up the folder and flipped through it again. They know exactly how far they can take your body before your mind starts to crack. They know exactly how short of the time you need to recover, and they can, and will put your body back in pristine order, just to repeat, as necessary. She paused for a moment, looking over a page in the folder before her gaze flicked back to Tayuya's. Do you understand, Tayuya-san? Tears blurring her eyes, Tayuya nodded her head slowly, terrified that somehow any little motion would set off the pain again. I don't believe I heard you. Her eyes left Tayuya, and again began to slowly read through the folder in front of her. Yes, I understand, Tayuya responded slowly through clenched teeth, as she glared back at the woman. Good, Tsunade agreed, as she nodded her head slightly. Now, I suppose you're expecting an interrogation? Hesitantly, and more than slightly confused by the woman's question, she again nodded her head, though she continued to refuse to say anything. I imagine you nodded your head, so I won't bother to ask you to repeat yourself this time, Tsunade said before shutting the folder and dropping it onto a nearby table. All you'll be able to provide me would be a few bases that Orochimaru will be sure to have abandoned by the time we arrive there. Any techniques we might want, we could simply harvest from your corpse. Slow sinking realization hit her, as she stared back at her with narrowed eyes, except for my fucking cursed seal. No, not particularly, she responded back with a shake of her head. While a curiosity, as you've encountered, we have something better. Bullshit. Then why am I even fucking alive? Tayuya demanded with a snarl. You fucking want something from me, do I? Maybe I was simply curious as to how one of the last Uzumaki ended up working for Orochimaru. Tsunade finally looked back at Tayuya, watching the confusion in her eyes. Oh? I suppose that would explain it. And why he put you in the position he did. You didn't know, did you? No what? What the hell are you talking about, you crazy bitch? Tayuya demanded, as she stared back at the woman. It was the hair that made me curious. Red hair is rare enough that I wanted to check myself. She walked up to the girl and looked her over. Probably the reason you survived the cursed seal to begin with. I survived because I'm not fucking weak, Tayuya snapped back with a growl, as she glared back at Tsunade, as she again tugged, roughly at her bindings. True, Uzumaki aren't weak, Tsunade agreed, as she looked over the girl, and sighed softly with a shake of her head. Explains the temper too. What, you think trying to tell me I've got some kind of family is going to impress me? What, am I the long-lost heir to a great and noble clan? Tayuya sneered, as she glared back at Tsunade. Hardly. The heir was never lost, Tsunade responded bluntly. It would have been me, were I not already the head of the Senju clan. No, the clan heir is quite alive, and rather well. So, what the hell do you want with the filthy daughter of a whore then? She snapped back, and glared at her. It's doubtful that your mother was a whore, that is, Tsunade noted. Possible, of course, but unlikely. Civilian probably, if I'm not mistaken. What the fuck does it matter then? What the hell do you want from me then? Tayuya demanded, as she glared back at Tsunade. Currently? Nothing, she stated simply, as she looked over the girl critically. I'm simply debating if you're going to be worth the trouble you'll bring if we keep you alive. Tayuya started to yell at her again, before she was cut off. Either way, we'll see what happens. If you survive what's to come, then we'll see if you stay alive or not, Tayuya-san, Tsunade stated simply, as she turned back towards the door. We will talk again later. What do you mean if I survive? Tayuya demanded before she could hear the sound of the door opening then closing. Damn it, answer me. Sakura stared up at the ceiling above her, the stale smell of antiseptic stinging at her nose, as she shifted restlessly upon her bed. She hated it here, hated laying in the bed, helpless, useless, and not knowing. It ate at her, as she shifted again, and pushed herself up to sit up, wrapping her arms about her knees. Sakura. Instantly her eyes flashed, and she looked over to see the familiar, imposing figure almost swallowing the door in a black leather trench coat. Ibiki-sensei. She quickly shifted to the edge of the bed, but faltered when he gave only the slightest little narrowing of his eyes in warning, and slowly she swung back, and obediently settled back onto the bed. Is there any word? The impromptu mission to prevent the defection of the traitor was successful, he stated simply, as he took a step inside, then closed the door behind him. As Kakashi is still out on a mission, it's fallen to me to fully debrief you, and give you your new orders until assignments have been finalized. Assignments? She asked, confusion written on her face. But Naruto stopped her, right? She didn't get away? She did not get away. However, how does that leave your team? Ibiki stated simply, as he looked down at her, and waited expectantly. She started to say before swallowing, and slowly nodding. We don't have a team anymore. No, you don't, he agreed. Thankfully, because of your actions, both you and Uzumaki are above suspicion on this. You can expect a commendation in your file, I imagine. Sakura's fingers slowly clenched into the sheets, as the tears started to glisten in her eyes, as she looked away. I don't want a commendation. What do you want then? It was a prompt, and she knew it, but what's more, it was an unspoken permission to open up. I want us to be a team again. I want Kakashi-sensei. I want Naruto. I want Sasuke-kun again. I want my team back. I want my family back. I don't want to keep losing everyone I start to care about. The tears came now, flowing from her eyes as she looked up at Ibiki, but I want to rip her throat out. I want to cut out her precious eyes, and make her scream. I want to tear her apart piece by piece. I want. You want to make her pay for what she did. For what she betrayed, he agreed with a nod, as he looked out into the window. For what she took away from you. Yes. Sakura almost shouted out before curling back up on the bed. I wonder why she had to do it. Why couldn't she see we could get strong together? Why couldn't she just be a little bit more patient? Does that change what happened? He asked, as he turned towards her. No, she admitted quietly with a shake of her head. Then deal with the what instead of the why. She made her choice. We simply have to live with the fallout from it, he stated simply. You said something about assignments, Ibiki-sensei? She asked, as she looked at the man again. Team 7 is being dissolved, he began simply. Uzumaki is moving to his apprenticeship under Jiraiya-sama. I understand, she bowed her head slightly, and fought down the tremble that went through her lip. Then what about? You're being moved to Team 10, under Asama Sarutobi, Ino's team, but Yamanaka was given a probationary promotion, and an apprenticeship to Anko, he answered simply, leaving a vacancy on the team. I understand, she said slowly before looking at him hopefully. Will I still be? You will still be working under myself, and Inoichi, time permitting with your new instructor, Ibiki stated simply. What about? She started to ask the question, then paused, looking back at him uncertain, as she bit down on her lower lip. That hasn't been released yet, Ibiki stated simply, as he then silently arched a brow up at her. Oh. Do I need to stay here any longer then? She asked slowly. I need to get back to training. I'll see what I can do, he said with a smirk. Gaara stood there, neutrally, as he waited next to his increasingly irate-looking brother, as he tilted his head to the side. You do realize it's pointless for you to be upset about this, don't you, Kankuro? How can you just be so damned calm about this? Kankuro demanded, as he glared back at his brother. They've made Tamari into a damned spoil. Taking hostages for the sake of ensuring behavior is a long tradition that has discouraged hostile behavior more often than encouraging it, Gaara stated diplomatically with a slight shrug of his shoulders. She's our sister, and it had to be either you or her, Gaara pointed out. And they did let you take me back to Suna. It should have been me. Who knows what kind of degrading, perverted things he's doing to her innocent body? Kankuro demanded with a glare at Gaara. Sunshine innocent? Kin's voice reached their ears, as she walked towards them, hands in the pockets of her jacket. You wouldn't be trying to imply something, now would you, spanking girl? Tamari asked sweetly, as she appeared next to her, giving her a look. Well, considering the things you were encouraging Naruto-sama to do to that innocent body of yours, Kin pointed out with a smug little smirk. Yes, please, keep telling embarrassing things about me in front of my brothers, Tamari started with a growl, as she flipped out one of her fans. I'll be happy for the excuse. Tamari, Gaara stated simply, as he nodded to his sister. Gaara, Tamari agreed, then looked him over cautiously. You don't look crazy. Not for Kankuro's lack of trying, Gaara agreed with a nod. Guess Naruto-sama did good work after all, Tamari said before looking around. Where is he anyway? He stopped at the ramen stand. Kin started with a shrug of her shoulders, as she lightly began to eye Tamari's brothers carefully. Something about not going through this on an empty stomach. Of course he did, Tamari groaned, as she lightly palmed her face. He just couldn't make this simple. He doesn't do simple things, Kin pointed out with a shrug. You know that, as well as I do. Doesn't mean I have to like it, Tamari answered with a growl before looking back at her brothers. So, you're here to finalize the ratification of the new treaty? We're here to deliver a scroll, and see how you're doing, Kankuro stated, as he carefully looked his big sister over. Well, you look alright, so they're not keeping you all locked up? No, not really, Tamari agreed with a nod, and a shrug of her shoulders. Hell, even been outside the village once already, picking up some new tricks, as well. New tricks? Gaara asked, as he tilted his head a bit to the side. Wordlessly, she held up her arm, and one of her fans snaked out. As her brothers watched, the fan snapped out, flashing open and closed. Sharp, shining razor's edges caught the sunlight, as her arm moved with a fluid grace, keeping the fan moving until it snapped shut in her palm. You're getting better. Still needs work, though, a new voice noted, as Jiraiya appeared standing on the wall above them, as he glanced at Gaara and Kankuro. So, these are your brothers, huh? Yes, Tamari stated flatly before sighing softly, as she gestured. Gaara, Kankuro, meets the old pervert. Old pervert? Gaara repeated, as he looked questioningly at the man, while Kankuro went pale. Tamari? Are you trying to get killed? Kankuro asked, as he stared at his sister. No, not currently. Why? She asked curiously. You just called Jiraiya of the old pervert, he stated simply, as he shifted lightly, staring up at the man with a kind of horrified awe. What else am I supposed to call the guy who could have been our uncle? Tamari asked simply with an innocent smile on her lips. Wait, what? Kankuro demanded, as he wildly started to look from her to a bemused-looking Jiraiya. You've been just waiting for that, haven't you? Jiraiya asked with a chuckle, as he looked back at Tamari. I think I've been hanging around Naruto-sama too much, Tamari admitted with an unrepentant smirk. What's this, and why am I only learning about it now? Kin demanded, as she looked back at Tamari. Gaara merely blinked confusedly, as he looked from Tamari to Jiraiya in confusion. He used to sleep with our aunt, Tamari answered, accompanied by Jiraiya's nod of agreement. If she hadn't died, who knows what would have happened? Wait, there could have been little mini perverts running around? Kin demanded, her eyes wide, as she stared at Tamari. Hold it, there was a woman other than who would sleep with him. I am right here, Jiraiya stated with a note of irritation. I'm sorry, someone else who would sleep with him without being paid? Kin corrected. And you're related to her? Tamari agreed with a slight nod of her head, our mother's older sister. And the world somehow still exists? Kin asked again, as she experimentally poked at a nearby wall. We're not going to get things like spontaneously erupting tentacles, are we? Ha, Jiraiya stated flatly. Hilarious. I'm a bitch, remember? Kin stated simply with a shrug of her shoulders. Someone going to go get Naruto-sama? Why would someone need to get him? Jiraiya asked, as his brow arched up. Because he's off eating ramen somewhere? Tamari asked, as she narrowed her eyes slightly. Okay, apparently I have to remind you of ninja rule number 1, Jiraiya stated simply, as he pointed up the wall. Always remember to look up. Sitting there up the wall, Naruto paused in the middle of eating his ramen, then slurped it down, and waved, heya. As he immediately resumed eating his meal, Tamari and Kin looked at him for a moment, then at each other, then at him again. Naruto-sama! Get down here! He paused again, slurping more of the noodles, before tilting his head to the side, and looking thoughtful before shaking his head. Nah, I think I'm good here. I've been enjoying eating my meal in peace. You do realize we can come up there to make you come down here, don't you? Kin stated, as she glared up at her master. Oh? Another voice asked. Can you, Kin-chan? Asked another. Kin blinked slightly, as suddenly there was a veritable wall of Narutos around them, all of them grinning back at her. Before her eyes narrowed, I can do that trick too, Maybe, but we can do it better, and our moves are just that much more awesome than yours are, one of the Narutos stated simply with a smirk. Are those all, physical clones? Kankuro asked, as he glanced nervously at Tamari. Yes, Tamari stated flatly, before sighing softly. I was hoping that we'd have a much more formal introduction, but Naruto-sama is Naruto-sama. And isn't this the loud-mouthed brat that beat you, Gaara? He asked, as he glanced at his little brother. Indeed, Gaara agreed with a nod. Naruto. Hey, Gaara. The main Naruto waved again before resuming his meal. That's it? Kankuro asked, blinking in confusion at his brother. You were expecting something different? Gaara asked, as he looked back at Kankuro. I thought you had a bunch of questions for him? It's rude to interrupt someone when they're eating. Yes, it is, Naruto stated, before taking another slurp of his noodles. It's also rude to eat like that in front of other people, Tamari stated in annoyance, crossing her arms about her chest. And? Naruto asked, a bit of noodles hanging from his lips. It's not like you have never seen me do this before. Sighing softly, Tamari put his hand on her face, and rubbed it lightly, and again, Naruto-sama is Naruto-sama. Whatever. Kankuro, Gaara, allow me to formally introduce you to Naruto-sama. Naruto-sama, I formally introduce you to my little brothers. They are here to make sure I'm alright, bring the acceptance of the new treaty back to Suna, and in Kankuro's case, whine impotently about all the horribly perverted things he thinks you'll do to me. But who's gonna protect me from all the horribly perverted things you want to do to me? Naruto demanded after taking another slurp of his noodles. No one, Jiraiya said in the perfect deadpan. I'll be happy to protect you, Naruto-sama, Kin stated eagerly. I'd be safer having her protect me from you, he observed before draining the remainder of the ramen broth, and tossing the bowl to Clone. Make sure that gets back, will you? Yeah, the clone grumbled before taking off the ramen stand. So, what's up? Naruto asked, blasé to the glares he was receiving from his girls. Some big fight? Do I need to worry about you trying to kill me, again in Gaara's case? Oh, maybe for your perverted sister's honor? Or is there another group of super badasses out to try to kill me? I wasn't, Gaara stated blandly. And not that I'm aware of. I can't speak for Kankuro though. Kankuro stared at Naruto, his mouth hanging in disbelief. For a moment there was silence. Then an airy squeak left Kankuro's mouth. Shrugging shoulders, Naruto let himself fall from the wall, twisted in midair to land on his feet on the street. Okay then. Nice to see you again. I have to go have a talk with my girlfriend. He paused, tilting his head to the side before looking over at Jiraiya, and noting, man, I never thought I'd actually say that. Have fun. Don't get in trouble, or else. Or else? Jiraiya asked, his arms crossed about his chest, as he looked down at the boy. I think someone is forgetting who the apprentice is, and who's the master. You, and Granny already used up your be evil to Naruto, and get away with it allowance for this week, he responded swiftly. And how much research will you get done if the guy who can be in 1,000 places at once is working against you? Jiraiya paused, frowning, as he gave Naruto a look before speaking. Are you trying to threaten me, brat? I am threatening you, Naruto emphasized, as he looked back over his shoulder at Jiraiya. And if you tried to withhold training for it, I'll go to Granny, and you can deal with her, or she'll deal with you. With that Naruto strolled off, his hands behind his head, and whistling a melancholy tune. Behind him, Jiraiya scowled while the girls gaped, Gaara blinked, and Kankuro just stared. Finally, Jiraiya shook his head, and stated, the brat is getting too damn cheeky for his good. When the fact that Jiraiya had actually allowed the boy to say that to him registered in Kankuro's head, he finally strained his mental processes to the breaking point, and they were forced to shut down. Your brother just fainted, Kin noticed in the strained voice. I think they finally cracked Naruto-sama, Tamari stated seriously. You know, you might be right, Jiraiya admitted then shrugged. Well, it'll be harder to crack next time. I'm curious, Gaara noted. Is there something in the water here, or is your insignia really a seal designed to warp human perception? I'm afraid that is a highly classified bit of information we cannot to disclose, Kin stated, as she finally seemed to recover some of her wits. He seemed to ponder that for a moment before nodding his head. So it's a type of communicable insanity? No comment, Jiraiya stated flatly. The quiet knocking on the door drew Inoichi's attention away from the warm bottle of sake he'd been contemplating. His wife had already denied his daughter from sharing a drink with them, despite the circumstances. Fortunately, she couldn't bring herself to deny him the drink. When he opened up the door, and saw Naruto standing there saw his daughter's boyfriend there, he sorely wished he was already halfway through the bottle. Hello Yamanaka-san. Is Ino here? The boy asked hopefully. For a moment Inoichi stared at him, his hand still on the door, before he asked in a coolly neutral voice, You mean, is your girlfriend here? She, told you, I guess? Naruto asked, suddenly rather nervous. If by that you mean told me that the two of you kissed, with tongue, he answered, his eyes narrowed into slits. Then yes. Just so I'm clear, this is an angry father thing, not a thing, right? Naruto asked for clarification. Palming his face lightly, Inoichi rubbed the skin over his eyes for a moment, before responding, "No, Naruto, this is not a thing. This is a you had your tongue in my little princess mouth thing." Naruto brightened visibly, and nodded his head happily. "As long as it's not a thing." Inoichi stared at him for a moment before opening the door, and resigning. "She's in the kitchen with her mother." "Thanks, Yamanaka-san," Naruto declared happily. There was a moment where Inoichi just stared after Naruto, as the boy quickly started the dart inside, then stopped a few feet in, and turned around, grinning sheepishly. As he scratched the back of his head, he asked, "Where's the kitchen?" Shoulders slumping, Inoichi hung his head, and then motioned for Naruto to follow him. For the duration of the short guidance, the man was sure this was what it felt like to be condemned. He was leading his daughter's boyfriend to go meet her inside of his own house. The one she had already admitted it to kissing rather intimately. "Who was at the door, dear?" His wife asked curiously before her eyes widened, as he stepped aside, and revealed a rather sheepish look at Naruto. "Oh dear, is this who I think it is? Naruto-kun!" Ino almost shouted, as her eyes widened. "Hi Ino-chan," he started nervously. "Can I, talk to you for a moment? In private?" Inoichi made a slightly strangled sound, and looked decidedly uncomfortable with that statement. Seeing the look on his face, his wife smiled sweetly, and asked, "Oh my, so bold. Already looking to indulge our daughter in her carnal desires? Such a good boy you are." Naruto froze in place, as he could feel slowly building a trickle of killing intent starting to flow out of the man next to him. Slowly turning his head, he looked up at the Inoichi with wide trembling eyes before again asking, "This is still not a thing, right?" "No. Uzumaki-san, it is most definitely not a thing," Inoichi growled. "Good, because the whole carnal desires thing is not why I'm here," Naruto said with a bright blush. "I gotta talk to her about what Granny is making me do." "Sounds serious," Ino's mother noted before tilting her head to the side. "You're not going to be sent off in a political marriage, are you? Because we didn't really raise our daughter to be the mistress type. Though if you're good enough, we might make an exception." Ino looked almost ready to explode. Her face was so red. As she stared wide-eyed from her mother, to Naruto, to her father, and then cycled between them, she struggled to keep up with what they were saying. When she finished processing what her mother just said, she opened her mouth to protest angrily only to be beaten to the punch by Naruto. "No!" he protested viciously. "It's not like that. She's making me take 2 more spoils. She won't let me talk her out of it." Into stared at him incredulously. "She's making you take 2 more? "Yes," he agreed with an almost violent nod of his head. "I sure as hell don't want anything to do with them." That sentence may have turned gears in all 3 Yamanaka's heads. Inoichi was the first to get it, leaving him to stare at Naruto, and mix pity and aggravation. His wife followed a moment later, as she sighed, and closed her eyes. As she spoke, Ino's eyes had finally lit up with both realization and outrage. "Well, that's us, both tragic and wonderful," she stated with a sigh, and a shake of her head, and looked out into the window. "But now far, far more tragic. And the second? Wonderful? Wonderful?" Ino demanded. Her face lit up in absolute outrage. "She's a traitor. She tried to defect to Orochimaru. She attacked Sakura. She should be gutted, and hung by her own intestines while she drowns in her own vomit and blood." Naruto mumbled under his breath to quiet for them to hear while nodding his head in agreement, though giving into an odd look. "That would be the tragic part, dear," she stated gently. "Though I can imagine a number of reasons Tsunade-sama would do that. She is the last Uchiha in the village. Leaving her to waste away in a cell would be." She glanced over at Inoichi. "What would you say, dear?" He winced, almost flinching back at her words before giving their look, as if to say, "Do I have to respond to that?" When she nodded her head, he pinched his nose. "I don't like it any more than you do, princess, but unfortunately politics is politics, and the politics in this situation say that we would lose too much if we executed her or left her rotting in prison. I take it there are protections in place in the seal?" Reluctantly nodding his head, Naruto spoke. "Yeah, I decide how far away from me she can get. And other stuff. You'd have to talk to the old pervert to get the full list." "And the other one?" Ino demanded. "They have to make sure that applying the seal will actually get rid of the cursed seal without killing her," he stated. "That means that I have to try it out on someone else with the cursed seal first." Ino just stared at him for a moment, her mind working through the information he'd given her. Then she collapsed back into her seat. "The sound bitch can beat down?" "Yeah," he admitted, as he slumped into a seat, then looked up at her pleadingly. "You have to believe me, Ino-chan." I tried to tell her no. They wouldn't let me. She just looked at him for a moment, staring at him with dull-looking eyes, before sighing heavily. Without saying a word she stood up, and walked over to him. Silently she studied him before sitting down in his lap, and wrapping them up in a hug. I believe you. Inoichi coughed uncomfortably, shifting, as he fought between the protective father, and how adorable the scene was. The narrowing of his wife's eyes quickly settled that. I'm going to go check on the store. You do that, dear, his wife agreed. That'll give me plenty of time to get to know our daughter's boyfriend. As he left, Inoichi had to admit he did feel a sense of vindication that at least the boy was going to get some level of torment, even if he didn't properly introduce him to his shovel. Fortunately, there was always later for that, as long as he didn't keep making sure it wasn't a thing. Sasuke Uchiha, the voice stated flatly. She sat up at her name, and then looked dully at the door. After a moment she could hear the audible sound of the lock opening. Then the audible squeal of protest from the hinges opening up reached her ears. Standing in the doorway was the woman she guessed to be Tsunade Senju, the Hokage. Tall, blonde, with an impossibly impressive bust and a gray top, with a green jacket hanging on her shoulders, and cold, distant eyes staring down at her. For a moment there was silence, as the two stared at one another, before Sasuke broke it by speaking. Am I to be transferred to the prison now? No, she stated simply. We don't plan to send you to prison. Execution, then? She asked dully, bringing one leg back against her chest, her heel catching on the edge of your seat, tilting forward, as she rested her chin on her knee. That was my preferred choice, yes, the Hokage agreed. However, that may or may not be your fate. I'm being given a choice? She asked, her brows furrowing in disbelief. No. You lost that right when you decided to turn traitor. Tsunade started with a slight hiss of displeasure in her voice. There is no choice. We are testing an alternative. If it works, it will be applied to you. If it does not, I will decide whether or not you will be publicly executed for your crime. An alternative? You are the one who was so eager to sell herself into slavery. You may just get your wish. Tayuya was less than pleased with her current predicament. She was currently naked from the waist up, and completely incapable of moving even the slightest bit. On top of that, some bastard was painting something on her, as she lay unresponsive on a smooth floor completely covered in what looked like little black squiggles. She knew, of course, what they were. The lines and connections for some kind of ceiling array, and based on her presence and positioning, something that was going to be applied to her. Every part of her wanted to scream, and curse, to claw, and punch, and kick, and bite them all, while cursing them out until their ears melted off their damned heads. But she couldn't. The woman, Tsunade, if she was to be believed, had given her something. A poison, a drug, she wasn't sure which. All she knew was that it completely shut down her body's ability to listen to what she wanted it to do beyond breathing and blinking. Even then it only went so far. Conscious control of her body seemed beyond her. She couldn't even halt her breathing or really close her eyes. It was terrifying. Then she heard the voices. So, this is her, huh? The voice was male, older, but not elderly. Wonder if he even knew what he had with him. Who knows? He's a genius. But Tsunade's voice stated simply. You've taken the drugs into account? Please, princess, who do you think you're talking to? He said, obviously affronted. An old pervert I've known entirely too long, she shot back. Now get on with it. We need to be ready for the brat. I love you too, princess, was shot back before Tayuya could feel the brush tickling up her arm, over onto her shoulder. Even if you're a scary old witch. What did you call me? Tsunade demanded. Careful, careful, wouldn't want me to do a misstroke, and completely destroy everyone in a horribly twisted and excruciatingly painful death, would you? The man chided with amusement. You do remember that I have all the time in the world to slowly remind you of my displeasure after all this is over, yes? Tsunade started acidically. Yes, yes, the man responded dismissively. Why don't you go get the brat while I finish this up, and leave you alone with a young girl? I have some restraint, he responded, more than slightly offended. Fine, but you better not try anything, she warned him. I like women, princesses, not little girls, he shot back. If she could, Tayuya would have turned crimson at his comment, and broken into a blistering attack on him in any way she could. Instead she was here, helpless. She couldn't move, she couldn't say anything, she couldn't do anything. She was trapped in her own body. She heard soft steps, and the sound of a door shutting and locking. Then she could feel the soft, cold, wet touch slowly, almost delicately, going to work on her back. You'll have to excuse Tsunade-chan. She means well. But she's rather, he paused, as if searching for the words while the sensation on her back continued to work in a steady, flowing pace over her skin. Well, Tsunade is Tsunade. Tayuya wished she could do something, even if it was just to send the man a glare. Instead she just lay there, forced to listen to him prattling on. Who the hell did this guy think he was? Oh, that's right, I didn't introduce myself, did I? He stated with a pleasant quality to his voice. We can't do the proper ones, of course. You're a little unable to introduce yourself at the moment. Perfectly understandable, really. as Tsunade is rather good at what she does, and when it comes to poisons and drugs, she knows more about them than anyone. She would reluctantly agree with his assessment, extremely reluctantly. But the woman was one of them for a reason. Well, Tayuya-chan, of the north gate of Orochimaru's 4 sounds, he let his voice trail off, still smirking, as he continued to work the seal onto her skin. You have now officially met all 3. If she could move, she would have frozen, as suddenly she realized just how deep down the shithole she was. 1. She had the slimmest of chances of getting away from. If she hadn't been drugged, nearly comatose, and in the middle of the enemy territory. Okay, so she was already screwed. This was just the cherry on the top of the well, and truly fucked Sunday. In case you're a bit confused, I am the gallant sage Jiraiya, he continued, and again she wished she could glare at him at the condescending manner in which he spoke. And I thought I'd give you some ideas of just what this seal I'm putting on you is going to do. First off, it should wipe away that pesky little cursed seal of Roki's. Second, from what I understand, you already got a taste of some of the enhancements from our little bitch, Kin. What I haven't exactly gone into great detail in telling them is that if Naruto dies, you'll be eaten alive by the demonic chakra that's going to be mixing with your system. Without him, and the seal to filter it, you'll all just end up having a nice big rush, then you'll start screaming, as it devours you from your chakra system. Nasty, isn't it? He noted, and she found it so easy to imagine him behind her, smirking down at her. Of course, running away? Well, then you end up on the other side of the equation. The chakra just gets sucked out of your body. You get weaker, and weaker the farther you run. Eventually, after you've collapsed, where your body is even more helpless than this, you just end up not even having the energy to breathe. Oh, how she wanted to glare at him now more than ever. But you'll have more chakra potential than you know what to do with, Jiraiya stated calmly. Potential that won't require you to reach into something that'll leave you helpless after you use it. And unless you really do something stupid, training on how to use it. She hated them oh so very much. She hated the way they talked to her. She hated the way they treated her. She hated the way that right now, somehow, they scared her more than Orochimaru did. She hated it all. Tamari sighed a bit, as she watched her Gaara sit comfortably, calmly, and more importantly peacefully in the seat across from her, as they sat at the restaurant, her fan slowly moving around her wrist and hand. Next to him, Kankuro nervously twitched his fingers, causing his chopsticks to move about above his hand on his chakra strings. At her side, Kin was flipping through a book on sealing, glancing up on occasion to see what the others were doing, and saying, "So far, it hasn't been much." "So, you appear to be adjusting well," Gaara said far more diplomatically than she was used to him being. "Found out things here and there," Tamari said simply, as she settled back into her seat. "Found out where Hokage's was." Kankuro froze, and stared back at Tamari wide-eyed, before narrowing his gaze. "Then who's the bastard?" She took a drink of water, before shaking her head ruefully. "From what I told you before, she was in a relationship with a Leaf Nin. She was ambushed by a bunch of Miss Nin, as retaliation for what we'd done looking for the third Kazekage. He came upon her just in time to avenge her." Kankuro frowned slightly. "They could have been lying to you." "Well, personally I wouldn't really call him that to his face," Shizen's voice said cheerfully, as she appeared next to their table. "So, Sunshine-chan, these are your little brothers?" Tamari blinked for a moment, and then sighed, as she slumped back in her seat. "So, are the rest of you going to come out?" "She's growing up." Anko appeared behind her, draping herself over Tamari. As her breasts settled atop her head, "She actually noticed us. Or she just figured that we would be here because we found it too amusing to not be," Yugogo commented, as she appeared at the table next to them, sitting across from the referee of the preliminary matches of the third round, Hate, who appeared from a melting distortion. "Well, you two found it too amusing," Hate noted with a slight smile on his lips. "You just dragged me along for the ride." Tamari did not groan, no matter how much she wanted to, as she reached up and lightly palmed her face, stifling the sign that threatened to escape her mouth. "Did you really expect anything else from them?" Kin asked, as she arched a brow towards Tamari. "I don't know why I didn't think they'd do it," Tamari stated simply, as she sighed softly. "I guess I figured they were more likely to wait until Naruto-sama showed back up." "Ah." Kin made a sound of agreement, before noting, "You just forgot how short their patience is when they're bored." "Yes," Tamari agreed. Gaara took a moment to look at the three women, and the man before looking back at Tamari, his brows furrowing. "I was not aware you were this popular." Tamari Kankuro was pinching his nose, as he tried to look anywhere, but at his sister, and the woman who was using her breasts, as Tamari's hat. "Can you please get her to stop that?" "No," Tamari stated flatly, "I can't. She's such a quick study, isn't she, Zun-chan?" Anko said cheerfully. "Hello, you must be Gaara-san, and Kankuro-san." Shizen bowed politely, and smiled cheerfully at the two. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Tsunade-sama's apprentice, Shizun. I do hope that you find our hospitality acceptable, and please excuse us for the assassination squads we have following you while you're in Konoha. Kankuro's attention was torn forcibly to Shizun, as his mouth hung open. Gaara nodded his head, as he gave her a polite bow, and responded, "Understandable, Shizun-san. We thank you for the hospitality. We shall be much more gracious guests than we were previously. I'm glad. Sunshine-chan would be upset if we had to send you to meet Ieg-san," Shizun said with that same calm smile on her face. "So we appreciate your gracious manners." "Yes, she's evil," Tamari stated, as she looked at Kankuro. "They all are. And they know it. Why am I included in that?" Hate asked curiously, as she sipped at a steaming glass of tea. "I haven't done anything to you." "She's sleeping with you," Tamari pointed to a blank-faced Yugogo. "No way she'd do that if you weren't. She just likes the way I handle my sword," Hate stated completely seriously. Yugogo nodded her head. "He's not wrong." Tamari stared for a moment, and then let her head fall forward, bowing. Next to her, Kin pursed her lips thoughtfully. She took a moment to glance from Hate's sword to Yugogo's. "His does look bigger," Kin noted before looking back at her book. "Now, Kin-chan," Shizun chided lightly. "It's not the size, but the skill of the one wielding it that matters." Kankuro struggled to get out, as he looked at the various individuals around him, then to Gaara. "I think you were right about the communicable insanity." "Really? I was starting to think they were all just perverts," Gaara observed calmly. Anko smirked at the red-haired boy. "Once you get used to it, it's not really that bad of a place to be." Tamari noted with a slight shrug of his shoulders. "Tamari, you're a spoil," Kankuro started with a sullen glare. "How does that make this any kind of place to be? How much more willing to actually behave are you? And Suna now?" Tamari countered back, and then sighed a bit. "What did you expect to happen, Kankuro? That somehow we'd be offered a chance to just go back to business, as usual with Konoha just bending over backwards to make things better for us when we were the ones to betray them?" "I understand why it happened," he responded back, as he gave her a slight glare. "I will probably even eventually accept it. But what I can't understand is why you seem okay with it." "She wasn't," Ken stated casually. "She sulked, and pouted, and complained, and whined. It was annoying." "Like you're one to comment about annoying," Tamari snapped back. "Really, do we really need to get into such vivid details of what actions you've both made?" Shizun asked calmly, as she arched a brow, and smiled pleasantly at them both. "We can, of course, and really, there is so much to cover. I'll need to know if I should make time in my schedule for you both. I think I'll pass." "You?" Tamari asked, as she glanced at Kin. "I'm good," Kin agreed quickly with a nod of her head. "Oh? Such a pity. I was looking forward to the break," Shizun noted with a slight sigh of disappointment. "Oh well. But to settle things, no, Sunshine did not just accept it. And Kin was also quite sulky for some time. Things happened, they accepted it. By the way, Gaara?" Tamari spoke up, as she warily looked at her youngest brother. "You need to start training." "I do?" Gaara repeated, confusion on his face. "Yeah," Tamari agreed, as she recalled the fight between Naruto and Kisame, and the information she'd looked up on the members of Akatsuki they knew about. Father Orochimaru killed father. There are people after that scare Orochimaru. I saw how one of them just played with Naruto-sama. Naruto-sama was fighting on borderline Jounin level. Kisame Hashigaki laughed. "Truly?" Gaara frowned a bit at the statement. He already knew he needed to train. He already knew he needed to get stronger. What his sister said though, "They're going to be coming for you, and coming for Naruto-sama," Tamari stated seriously, as he stared into her brother's eyes unflinchingly. "Naruto-sama has Jiraiya-san, and others. You need to step up your training. You too, Kankuro. Get old Lady Chio involved." "That crazy old bat?" Kankuro demanded, as he stared back at her. "Are you insane? Chiodano is the foremost expert in puppetry, still loyal to Suna," Gaara pointed out quietly, his lips pursing softly before he looked at Tamari warily. "Do you believe this Akatsuki will be included?" It took Tamari a moment to realize exactly who Gaara was hinting at, and she grimaced in response. "I wouldn't rule it out. He is S-class." Shizun arched her brow slightly, before frowning, as she listened to their conversation. Would you be talking about Sasori?" "Yes," Gaara started with a slight nod of his head, and a frown. "Which would imply that this organization is likely fully briefed on the typical abilities of my predecessors. Then pick up new ones," Kin stated simply, as she flipped through her book. "It's what Naruto-sama is doing, and what I'm going to be doing. And hell, even what Sunshine is doing." "You don't seem very big on training," Kankuro noted with a slight frown. Kin looked up from her book, and gave the boy a look that implied a great number of different things. "It's called Shadow Clones, and you think I'm reading up on seals for pure pleasure reading?" Oh, Anko perked up immediately. You're on shadow clone training now? Why didn't anyone tell me? Because they're in control, and manipulation practice, Kin stated flatly, as she gave the woman a look. I have basics I need to get down first. Fool, Anko pouted, as she glared sullenly at the girl. That's no fun. You already have an apprentice to look after, remember, Anko-chan? Shizen pointed out helpfully. You do want to make sure that Naruto-kun's little girlfriend passes her review, don't you? Curses, Anko stated sullenly, refusing to acknowledge the point. Just means all the more fun for me, Yugago noted, as she smiled serenely at Kin. Damn it, Kin cursed lightly, as she focused more heavily on her book. And now it's at the point where we can include sunshine, Yugago agreed with a nod of her head. Hate, won't you help me instruct these poor little students that have fallen into my hands? Sure, I need something to do while I wait to be cleared for active duty again after Tsunade-sama's procedure. Hate agreed before coughing quietly into his hand. Ah, apologies. Double damn it, Tamari agreed. Naruto glanced nervously over at Ino, who was looking at him with an incredibly neutral look on her face. I already told you I believed you, Naruto, Ino stated simply, as she walked with him. I know this isn't your choice, okay? He asked, looking at her still nervously. I don't like it, she stated flatly, crossing her arms about her chest. At all. It's bad enough I already had to share you with the bitch, and sunshine. Now 2 more? When does it stop? Naruto slumped slightly, and sighed when I become Hokage, and say no more? Ino twitched slightly, and growled lightly, as she leaned in, and grabbed hold of him. Pinning her body against his, she leaned in, and then bit firmly against the side of his neck. I am not good at sharing, Naruto. Naruto chuckled nervously, as he suppressed a shiver that ran down his spine. Ah, Ino-chan. Mine, she stated simply, as she gave him a glare, and I really don't like having to share you with Sasuke of all people. Naruto shuddered at that reminder. Oh man, I thought she was a he. I still think of Sasuke, as he is. Not her. And that's just enough. You're lucky I'm not Sakura, Ino noted with a slight smirk on her lips. Though you might be too butch for her fantasies. Huh? Naruto looked at her in confusion. I keep forgetting how dense you are sometimes, she noted before firmly threading her arm around his, and holding close to him, as they walked. As Naruto grumbled softly, Ino leaned into him, and frowned slightly, as she caught sight of the various civilians sending cold looks of disgust. It irritated her, the way that they looked at them, the way they could look at Naruto, and see anything but Naruto, and to judge him on something that was trapped inside of him, that he was keeping prisoner. She wondered how he managed to still see the bright side of Konoha. So, you think we have time to stop for a bowl of ramen before we go there? Naruto asked hopefully. Weren't you telling me you already had a bowl before you came to see me? She pointed out, shifting slightly to crane her neck up to look at him, still resting it against his shoulder. Well, yeah, but then we had all that talking, and we had to talk about this stupid Sasuke situation, and, you're a glutton, she finished for him with a roll of her eyes. Hey, I burn through energy really quickly, and I can't make a bunch of shadow clones like I normally would. And he paused, blushing brightly. I'd really like to eat a meal with you. Fine, she said with a slight huff of feigned indignation. He saw it, he embodied it. Maybe somehow the 4th Hokage had been able to see that when he chose Naruto because she couldn't really imagine anyone else managing to simply endure like he had. Not like he had. Other people got worn down, they seemed to crack, or break but not Naruto. Awesome, he declared cheerfully, and then almost bashfully leaned down, and kissed her cheek. And she was going to do her best to make sure that he never did. It had been easy enough to ignore what was coming when he'd been with Ino at Ichiraku's getting a bowl of ramen, and simply just enjoying being with her. He wasn't sure how he was really supposed to react to that. On one hand, he did like it, quite a lot, especially when she pressed up against him, rubbing along with him, kissing him. On the other hand, he didn't want to end up a pervert like Kakashi, and Jiraiya, and Kin, and Tamari, and Ino, and Sakura. And it was a dawning realization that he had built up his life in a way that left him completely and totally surrounded by perverts. Damn it. Something wrong? Ino asked next to him, frowning slightly, as she looked at him worriedly. He froze for a moment, then grinned sheepishly at her. Oh, nothing. Just realized with my luck I'm going to be stuck with even more perverts. Well, Sasuke wasn't a pervert, right? She reminded him. Tamari wasn't a pervert before either, Naruto reminded her with a grunt. Well, hopefully that won't change with Sasuke, Ino stated simply. Naruto, a new voice, spoke up solemnly, as Kakashi appeared in front of them in a swirl of leaves. I understand there was an incident. Naruto stared at him for a moment, while Ino snorted softly. That's one way of putting it. And from what I was told, you both handled yourselves admirably. Kakashi was apparently struggling for the right words, as he looked over both of them. I'm sorry about Sasuke. She made her choice, Naruto said with a frown on his lips. We did what we had to. Kakashi nodded his head quietly. I know. Tsunade-sama said you're to get Sasuke, and one of the other prisoners, as? The frown turned into a scowl, as Naruto looked away with a glare. I told her I didn't want to do it. She ordered me to. I understand, Kakashi said seriously, as he put his hand on Naruto's shoulder. It can't be easy, and now they're going to consume your life with horrible things like shopping, and gossip, and, he twisted in an almost inhuman way out of the path of Ino's stab with A, and pouted at her. Now, that wasn't very nice. I'm now Anko-sensei's apprentice, Ino stated flatly, as she glared at the man. Ah, right, that, Kakashi reluctantly nodded his head in understanding. I suppose so. Though what will the review board say about you attacking A? I'll mention it's you, and they'll understand, Ino growled. Kakashi's shoulders immediately slumped. True. Was there something you wanted to talk about, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked with only a slight hint of irritation. I kind of have to get to ANBU headquarters to start the procedure. What luck! I was heading there myself, Kakashi said cheerfully. Let me help you both get there. You don't need Naruto to start a protest. I insist. And with that he grabbed hold of both of their shoulders, and vanished in a swirl of leaves. You're late, Tsunade stated simply, as she gave Naruto a look. Sorry, I had to. Kakashi started to respond, before blinking, as her glare turned to him. Oh, you meant Naruto. You didn't really tell me when I was supposed to be here, Naruto countered back. You just sent a messenger for me to come. Are you trying to argue with me, brat? Tsunade asked, as she glared back at the boy. Telling the truth, Granny, he snapped back without missing a beat. Brat, she stated with a sour twist of her lips, and a shake of her head. Come on, we're waiting on you, and the drugs won't last too much longer. Drugs? Naruto repeated with a blink. She tends to be rebellious, Tsunade stated flatly. And I'm not going to risk her screwing something up, and hurting you. Ah, right, Naruto slowly nodded his head, as Tsunade turned, and walked deeper into the complex. As he followed after her, he glanced nervously around before feeling the reassuring squeeze on his hand from Ino. Uncertain at first, he then squeezed her hand in turn, and offered her a sheepish smile. That earned him a roll of her eyes, and a nudge in his shoulder. If you're both finished flirting? Tsunade asked with a hint of exasperation. I don't know, it's rather cute, Kakashi noted with a bright smile. Ah, such wonderful research you give your sensei, Jiraiya's voice added, cackling softly, as he began to scribble away in his book. Such wonders, such delights, such plot twists. I'm pretty sure that anything you're writing based on this will not resemble what happened in the least, Ino stated flatly, as she shook her head, and gave the man a glare. You old pervert. Bah, artistic license, Jiraiya said dismissively before gesturing into the room. Ready? Naruto sighed, and shrugged his shoulders. I don't suppose reminding you that I really don't want to do this is going to do any good? Not in the least, Tsunade agreed with a nod of her head. You're going to do this. Having to try, Naruto started with a frown. Tsunade stated skeptically. You know the drill by now, brat, Jiraiya stated. Sighing, Naruto took off his coat, and handed it to Ino before carefully walking through the seal to the unmoving girl at the center. So, just like before? Just like before, Jiraiya agreed. We already have Shizen with your other girls so we can make sure to watch what happens. Right, Naruto said warily, and nodded his head just a bit before holding out his hand to Jiraiya. You need more of my blood, right? Yup, Jiraiya agreed, taking the boy's hand, only to have Tsunade interject. Let's leave that to the trained medical professionals, shall we? She stated blandly before using a scalpel to carefully open up the boy's hand without doing any major damage. Works for me, Jiraiya agreed before nodding his head after a moment. That's enough. Tsunade nodded her head, and carefully sealed up the wound, as Jiraiya went to work, mixing the blood into the ink. A short time later, he placed Naruto's hand between the girl's shoulder blades, and went to work completing the seal. As he worked, Naruto frowned, as he noticed a difference. Hey, what's with that stuff on the back of her neck? Cur seal, Jiraiya stated simply. We're going to see if we really can wipe it away. Oh, Naruto started slowly before carefully nodding his head. Okay, done. Just like before, but you might have to. This time things might be fighting you. Frowning, Naruto nodded his head, and began to push out his chakra like before. Just like before, he could feel his awareness of her body beginning to slowly expand. He could feel the pulsing of her coils, the echoing sensation rippling back into him. Then he could feel the first sign that there was something different. He wasn't sure how to describe it. It was like some kind of foul oil sticking to her coils, infecting it, polluting it. It was utterly and completely foreign, and unlike his own chakra, there was something forcing it to remain. Her chakra wasn't really harmonized to it. It was more forced into her body. and then he could feel the way it tried to spread back into him. With a frown, he continued to feed his chakra into her, harmonizing her coils into his. But he could feel it, the way the closer their coils got to one another, the more that taint tried to push into him. You're playing a dangerous game. He recognized the voice immediately, almost breaking his concentration, before he quickly recovered, and continued to work on the seal. It's not a game, perhaps. Do you truly want to let that thing in? Hell no! I want that filth out of her, so she can be another one of your little pets? There was amusement in the Bija's voice, as he spoke. I must admit you've been far more entertaining than my previous hosts. You're not going to try and convince me to let you out so you can finish destroying Konoha again, are you? Brat, he responded before pausing. Do you want the girl to live? Why are you asking? Boredom, curiosity, the desire to avoid you wallowing in foolish pity, was the response. Take your pick. Of course, I'm just a monster, so what do I know? I won't help you destroy Konoha, he responded stubbornly. I never wanted to attack your little village to begin with. While I prefer the seal over my previous one, it was not my doing that led to the attack on your village, they responded. I wasn't the one that was responsible for your parents' deaths. That was the same person who bound my mind and ripped me out of your mother's body. What? Naruto voiced the question aloud, causing the people around him to look at him worriedly, as he continued to focus on his task. I have been a prisoner since the battle that carved out what you know as the Valley of the End. Your mother was my jailer before you. The act of removing me from her was fatal. It is a testament to the strength of her life force that she survived long enough to aid in my sealing into you. Then what do you want, and why should I believe you? He demanded, as he could feel the chakra inside of Tayuya stir more angrily, trying to seep into him at every chance it got. You are different. My previous hosts tried to ignore me. When we did speak, they spoke to me, as if I was nothing but a mindless thing, a beast. They did not use my power, they suppressed it entirely. You, though, I told you, we're stuck together, and you're living in my body. And we're in this together. Yes, now we are. There was a pause in the answer before the continued irritation was evident. Thanks to your pet's ability to channel my chakra when you do, I no longer have the ability to simply overwhelm you. You can balance the chakra between you, and even if I could get away from you, that man is still out there. Who? The bastard with those accursed eyes that turned me into a prisoner in my own body. The one that wants to use me as his puppet, his tool. I am not some nameless, pathetic little spirit. I will not be a slave. What's your name then? Naruto asked, as he could feel his chakra starting to ebb in power, as he continued to feed the brightly glowing seal. What? You just said you weren't nameless, so what's your name? There was a pause before the voice spoke. Kurama. My name is Kurama. Well, Kurama, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Will you help me out, so we can kick the asses of the jackasses that want to fuck up our lives even more? There was silence, before slowly a chuckle began to echo to Naruto's ears. You have guts, Naruto Uzumaki. And you're going to be making one of those bastard Uchiha with their accursed eyes into your pet if you succeed with this one, yes? That's what they're planning. I find that idea appealing. So, for this, and only for this, I will allow you to have a taste of what it means to truly use my chakra. What? Confusion rippled through Naruto before suddenly he could feel an enormous rush of power flowing through him. Those watching him could only stare in shock, as Naruto seemed to transform into a being of pure, radiant yellow energy. Instantly Naruto could feel the tainted chakra of the seal recoiling, pulling away from him, trying to hide. As this new chakra flowed into Tayuya's coils, the polluting chakra of the cursed seal withdrew further, and further back into its origin. And then, when it had retreated fully back into the seal, it wrapped up that last bastion in a great swell of power. In that moment a molted, dark form tried to erupt out of the seal. A gurgling, half-heard scream filled the air, as a half-formed face and hand could be seen for a brief moment. Then they melted back. The burning spread of the power flowing through Naruto covered Tayuya. When it finished, it burned the blemish of the cursed seal away. Then, when the last of the cursed seal was wiped away, Naruto collapsed back onto Tayuya's thighs. What the hell was that? I don't fucking know, but could you get the fuck off of me, and let me have some damned clothes? Tayuya demanded with a snarl, as she suddenly found herself back completely in control of her body. Hey, there might be hope for you yet, Naruto Uzumaki. Somewhere, hidden in the land of rice, Orochimaru screamed in agony. Naruto lay back in the hospital bed, and sighed in irritation. He was confined to the bed while Tsunade ran tests on him, and on his latest spoil. In the meantime, he was stuck, waiting with nothing to do. So, he settled for having a conversation with the newly dubbed Kurama, formerly known as the fuzzy bastard tenant that wanted to destroy Konoha. So, if you hadn't helped me, what would have happened? It was a valid concern for the boy, as he settled back, and closed his eyes for his conversation. A long, boring process of slowly smothering that foreign chakra beneath your own, Kurama had responded with the mental equivalent of a shrug and a snort. Or it would have tried to force itself into you, and the rest of your little harem, and died in a far less spectacular fashion. Then why do anything at all? Naruto demanded back. Because then she would have died, and the Uchiha wouldn't have been put under your thumb next. But you said it would have died. In you and them, yes. In the girl, since the seal connecting her to you had never been finished? She would have died screaming, as the dead chakra hit her gates. Oh. So, Kin and Tamari were never in danger? Your little pets were never in danger. The only life in the balance was the foul-mouthed little bitches. Which is why you asked me if I wanted her to live. Naruto pondered the notion, and slowly nodded his head. That, and I really was horribly amused at the idea of an Uchiha being turned into the pet of my container. It was a frank admission by Kurama, but Naruto could practically feel the grin on the fox's face. What the hell did you do? Kin had arrived, and she was most assuredly less than happy. Hello, Kin-chan. It's nice to see you too. Did you have a good time with Sunshine's brothers? Naruto responded with an arch of his brow. Yeah, I think she would like to know what happened, and why we turned yellow for a time. Naruto-sama, Tamari cut in, as she shook her head a bit. Oh, that was Kurama, Naruto stated simply. Kurama? Kin repeated, staring at Naruto. Yup, Naruto agreed. You're doing this just to be an ass, aren't you? Tamari stated flatly. Would I do that, Sunshine? Naruto asked with an entirely too innocent smile. In a heartbeat, Tamari agreed with a frown. I think we've been a bad influence on him, Kin noted. I know you've been a bad influence on him, Ino's voice cut in, as she walked into the room, arms crossed about her chest, and a frown on her face. What did you do, Naruto? I just did what they asked me to do, Naruto responded insistently. It's just it didn't work out how they thought it would. Ino repeated, still giving him a look. I'm serious, Naruto insisted before glancing around furtively. I just had to get some help from Kurama. Kurama? Ino repeated, a brow arched up, arms still across her chest. Well, you see, the funny story. Naruto shifted about slightly. It has a name. It's Kurama. My name is not a funny story, Kurama countered back with a huff. That was not the Kyuubi's chakra, Kin stated authoritatively. I know what that feels like, and that was definitely not it. Yes, it was, Naruto argued back with a huff. I was the one that was actually involved in it. I know what it was. That doesn't make sense, Kin argued back. The chakra has always been red. Angry, hungry. That stuff was. It was a taste of what it truly means to wield his power, Naruto quotes, and shrugged. And I have to wait here for them to finish checking me over, and make sure it's all good so we can do Sasuke next. But Kin started to protest. Why was it different this time then? Tamari asked instead. Because apparently if I did it the usual way, the girl would have died, Naruto stated. And Kurama-san just wanted to help out of the kindness of his heart, Ino asked with no small amount of skeptic sarcasm in her voice. Actually, he did it because if she had died, then they wouldn't have done it to Sasuke, Naruto said with a slight shift in the bed. He finds the thought of making her a slave ironically amusing. Indeed. Okay, Ino started with a nod, as she relaxed slightly. That makes more sense. How does that make more sense? Kin demanded. According to the history books, it was under the control of the Uchiha. Madara, specifically, Ino answered. And since none of them served anyone willingly, it had to have been controlled somehow. And the chance to make an Uchiha a slave has to be appealing to it. Well, at least your Mei has a brain. Hopefully she rubs off on you more. Naruto's eye twitched slightly at that comment, and he reflexively muttered, I am so going to get you for that. What was that, Naruto-kun? Ino asked sweetly. Her eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. Not you, Naruto said quickly. Him. Ino looked at him neutrally for a moment before shaking her head, sighing, and giving him a look. You do realize, of course, you owe me a damned good date, and a good makeout session now. I do? Naruto asked, eyes wide, and staring. Yes, you do, Ino agreed with a firm nod of her head before smirking. And if you're good, she leaned in, and whispered into his ear. In response, Naruto's entire face turned a bright tomato red. Then a trickle of blood flowed out of his nose, as he just stared back at her smirk. Naruto continued to stare back at her for a moment, before his head hummed, and his shoulders slumped. I'm doomed, aren't I? Yes, definitely, absolutely, amusingly. Sasuke shifted about on the heels she was forced to wear now. It had been a learning experience to say the least, the need to balance, and step, and the way that it added to the femininity she'd spent so long denying. It wasn't really debilitating, it wasn't a career-ending condition, but it was a constant reminder of what she tried to do, and she knew that it was likely done on purpose. Sighing, she shifted a bit then again walked back, and forth along the length of her cell, and back. She had nothing else better to do while she waited. If her manacles hadn't blocked her chakra usage, she'd have been walking up the walls, and across the ceiling. As it was, she was frustratingly aware of the mincing little steps that made her hips sway the fetter chains limited her to. "I see you've adapted already," Shizen stated, as she stepped in front of the cell. "And in such a girly manner. Why, I'm surprised. Who knew, Uchiha-chan?" Stiffening slightly, she then bowed forward, as much as she was allowed with her restraints. "Shizen-san. And so polite." Shizen clapped her hands together lightly. "Why, one would think you were accepting your fate instead of just hoping to lure us into a sense of false security." "Very nice, Uchiha-chan. Why, if I hadn't been there when your broken, bleeding, and unconscious body was taken to me for healing, I might actually believe it." "Oh, I trust your ankles aren't giving you too much problem?" "I am so very sorry about that, but I'm afraid with everything, it completely slipped my mind to double-check to make sure you would be able to walk properly." Sasuke's eye twitched only slightly, as she nodded her head. "Understandable." "Of course," Shizen agreed with a nod. "Well, fortunately I'm sure you'll be getting much more in touch with your feminine side in the future. If you survive, at least." "I see," Sasuke stated, even though she really didn't. "Why, imagine the curves you'll start to put on when you're pregnant with your first child." Shizen continued cheerfully. "All those hormones rushing through your body." Sasuke twitched slightly. "Yes, I know what you're thinking, you're an Uchiha," Shizen agreed with a nod of her head. "But fortunately, there have been wonderful advances made by Tsunade-sama in the areas of cosmetic medicine. You'll never be mistaken for a boy again by the time we're done with you." It took all her control to keep her face utterly and completely neutral, as she just stared back at Shizen, who, in turn, just grinned wider, eyes sparkling, as she continued. "And all those drab, boring old clothes? Don't worry, nothing like that for you anymore. No need to pretend to be a boy ever again." "I see," she said in a quiet, controlled voice that only warbled slightly. "Oh, I'm not sure you do just yet, Uchiha-chan." Shizen started with a chilly smile, as she leaned in close to the bars. "Every little thing that you were is going to be stripped away from you. Who you were, what you were, you will look in the mirror, and not see Sasuke Uchiha who was the Konoha. You will see a beautiful, feminine, made-up little sex pet for your master. You will recognize just enough of who that was in that image, to remember, just enough to see how far you've fallen, just enough to understand just how much betrayal has cost you. And then everyone else will see the same. You will be a walking, talking little reminder of just what treason can cost." She smiled then, cheerfully back at Sasuke. "And you will bear it all with a smile. And do you know why, Uchiha-chan?" And Sasuke did. Her head bowed, as she spoke the answer quietly. "Because it is better than I deserve." "So glad you understand," Shizen said with a nod, and a smile before she turned, and walked away, leaving Sasuke with her thoughts. "Well, they both appear to be fine," Tsunade agreed reluctantly with a tsk of displeasure, as she looked down clinically at Tayuya. "Though with this one it might not last if she doesn't learn to watch her mouth." "Well, there's always the old standby," Jiraiya noted, with an innocent smile. "What, wash my fucking mouth out with soap?" Tayuya declared with a sneer. "No. Slug slime," Jiraiya corrected cheerfully. "Probably with a healthy dose of toad oil mixed in." Tayuya opened her mouth, but couldn't quite find the words to respond, as she stared at the two, before repeating, "Slug slime, and toad oil. There's only a 10% chance you'll turn into a sentient toad statue, still completely aware, but unable to move, unable to react, unable to interact in the least," Jiraiya agreed. "And that's just with the toad oil. With the slug slime? Oh boy." Tayuya stared at them both, and then shrank back down, and remained silent. "Excellent. I told you she could be trained." Jiraiya smiled beatifically at Tsunade. Tayuya growled low in her throat, glaring at him, but otherwise kept her mouth shut. Yes, Tsunade agreed with a nod of her head, as she looked at Tayuya critically. "Well, at least it's something. We'll need to sit her down with Kurenai for training once she gets her chakra control back up to par." "What?" Tayuya stated, as she stared back at the woman, not quite sure she heard her right. "Your chakra control is going to be non-existent until you learn how to handle your increasing potential," Tsunade answered clinically. "We saw it in both Kin and Tamari." At the mention of Kin, Tayuya growled out again, as her eyes flashed dangerously. "Now, Tayuya-chan, don't be like that," Jiraiya said. "She's your big sister now." Tayuya turned her head, and stared at Jiraiya. "The F language," he reminded her with a waggled finger. "Kin has seniority over you with Naruto, and Konoha. Fortunately, for you at least, Tamari is the one who has disciplinary privileges over you." Tsunade cuts in smoothly, and shares seniority with Kin. "And Naruto's girlfriend outranks you all," Jiraiya stated before pulling out his notebook. "Oh, sweet news, how you love me so much." Tsunade flicked him atop his head, sending him face first into the floor, before looking back at Tayuya. I will warn you about this once, and only once. You will behave. You are not Kin, who chose her fate. You are not Tamari, who is here for political reasons. You betray or attack us once. She paused a moment before Tayuya was subjected to Tsunade's full killing intent focused down upon her with laser-like intensity. I will slowly rot your flesh while you feel every little bit. I will cut you open to the bone, then drop maggots into your flesh to keep it constantly cleaned out, where you can feel them writhing, as they eat away at the dead flesh. I will make water taste like bile, and I will leave you soaking in your own waste. Then I will make you beg to be sent back to Orochimaru, as a lab rat, because it will be eminently preferable to what I will put you through. Am I clear? Tayuya felt like an animal, trapped, and pinned down on a laboratory table, and then submitted to its own dissection while still alive, and without any anesthesia. She could practically see her mouth already filled with the biting taste of bile, and she struggled to keep her bowels in check. Still, she managed a quick, panicked nod. Good. Tsunade left up the intent for a moment longer before reining it in, because then, when I was done, I'd heal you up, as good as new, and let Jiraiya have his turn. Aw, princess, you do care. Jiraiya started cheerfully, smiling at Tayuya in a way that scared her, as much as Tsunade's glare had. Do you really need me to tell you what I do, Tayuya-chan? Because I can guarantee you'd probably faint before I got even halfway through it. I'm very creative. Tayuya just whimpered like a broken animal, and slowly shook her head. Good, Jiraiya patted her atop her head, because after I was done with you, I'd give you to Anko. And she was Roki's apprentice. That was apparently, as far as she could hold her bowels. Tsunade wrinkled her nose, and shook her head. Thank you, Jiraiya. Now I have to have someone change the bed sheets. I try, Jiraiya said cheerfully. Anko had just entered the hospital when she was caught by a sudden and powerful sneeze. Frowning, she took a moment to sniff the air, but found nothing else of irritation. Shaking her head, she then made her way to the room where the Hokage had requested she report to. Knocking politely at the door, she then took up position at the side, leaning back against the wall, and waiting for someone to exit. It was a few minutes later that a disgruntled orderly pulled a laundry cart out of the room, and nodded back into it. They're ready for you now. Nodding neutrally back at the orderly, Anko stepped into the room, her hands in the pockets of her trench coat. You wanted to see me, boss lady? Tsunade looked up, and nodded her head in Anko's direction, as Jiraiya gave a half-hearted wave from where he was rubbing his face. Anko, good, you're here. Anko didn't miss the stiffening and paling of the red-haired girl in the room, dressed in only a hospital gown, watching her, as if she had suddenly turned into her former teacher at the mention of her name, nor the look of horrified apprehension. This is Tayuya. Tayuya, this is Anko Midarashi. Yes, that Anko. She is going to be supervising you while getting you some clothes and equipment, Tsunade stated simply. Tayuya is the other surviving member of Orochimaru's Little Sounds, like the one we gave your department. I suppose I don't get to play with her then? Anko started with a slight pout. The fat one already broke. I barely even got started, and he was already ready to spill his guts. She's Naruto's. Talk to him about it, Tsunade stated simply. Tayuya swallowed heavily, as she quickly realized that she was going to want to stay on her new master's good side. Goody, Anko agreed with her hands rubbing together, as she looked at Tayuya. Fortunately, I have an in with the brat. You see, his girlfriend? My apprentice. As she was led out of the room, still clad in nothing but the horribly brief and ugly hospital gown, Tayuya wondered if she'd even try to behave, or if she was simply damned from the start. Sometime later, in the dressing room of a store far nicer than she was used to being able to enter, she was staring from one mirror to another, her long hair pulled to the side, as she attempted to grasp the full extent of the change. The back of her neck was naked of anything but smooth, soft skin, lacking the 3 hooks of Orochimaru's curse seal. Between her shoulders, however, she could see the curling spiral of what she assumed was the one that had replaced it. It was familiar in a way that tugged at the back of her mind, but didn't quite ring into her recall. Sighing, she shook her head, and lightly tossed her hair back over her shoulder, covering both once more, as she looked back at what she'd been given. And again, she felt a grimace of distaste. Does it have to be a thong? She asked almost petulantly. It could be nothing? Anko offered helpfully back at her. Besides, what are you complaining about? You have the ass for it. Tayuya blushes almost the same shade as her hair before growling softly. That's not the point. They're just really uncomfortable. Be glad you're not going to be wearing what Sasuke is. We're only making you wear one piece of girly clothing. Now, try on the rest of the outfit, and look it over. Sighing, Tayuya mentally admitted that the woman was right. Not that she'd ever vocalize it. Grumbling softly, she started with the gray pants, loose everywhere. But her ass, with plenty of pockets to fill with various tools and tricks. That had always been something she disliked about the Sound 4 uniforms. They had practically no pockets at all. She tapped up her ankles and calves, sliding her feet into the provided sandals before taking a look at herself in the mirror once more. So far, not bad. If nothing else, she'd be keeping the pants. Next, she pulled on the top, a black, cropped, long-sleeved piece that covered the entirety of her back, and her neck almost up to her jaw, but left the middle of her back exposed, and her seal plain to see. Again, despite the exposure, it wasn't a bad look, as she took a moment, posing in front of the mirror before continuing. A gray vest, matched to her pants, was pulled over her shoulders, filled with plenty of pockets. Over her hands, she pulled on a pair of fingerless black leather gloves. Then, to finish it, a simple black bandana covered her head. Grudgingly, she admitted she actually found herself somewhat liking the look. Well? Don't keep us in suspense, Red. Come on out, and show us how you look. For a moment Tayuya sighed, and shook her head before squaring her shoulders, turning, and purposely walking out of the dressing room. Anko was grinning happily. Next to her she could see the shorter blonde girl she remembered showing up with the group, who looked at her with a sharp scrutiny in her unreadable blue eyes. Next to her she saw the familiar form of Kin, who was glaring at her with dark, angry eyes, and the taller blonde with cold, dark green eyes. Finally, there was her new master, looking more than slightly bored with everything, which, she had to admit, stung a bit. She wasn't a classic beauty or a model or anything like that, but damn it, she was good looking. She knew that much. Not bad, Anko agreed with a pleased, preening smile. I do good work. Excellent. Can't we just kill her, and be done with it? Kin asked plaintively. No, Naruto, Ino, and Anko started in unison. Cripple? She asked hopefully. No. Hurt some? She asked again, only to receive a group of looks. Annoy? You do that to everyone anyway, Tamari noted with a snort. Tayuya just glared back at Kin the whole time. Do you have any idea what that bitch did to me? Kin started with a snarl. And you smashed her face in already, Ino cut in, and beat her down in a fight. When Kin started to protest again, Ino cut her off once more. You want more? Save it for sparring. Tayuya had a feeling that she was not looking forward to what was going to happen when the spar happened. That evening found the three spoils stripped down to hospital gowns, and forced to sit on monitoring seals in a mostly empty hospital room. Damn it, why can't you just use her for this, and let us relax? Kin demanded, as she shifted uncomfortably on the cold floor, glaring at Tayuya. Because 3 sets of data are better than just one, Shizen responded without even looking at Kin, as she inspected each of the seal arrays with a critical eye. But, Kin protested again before turning her head, and glaring at Tayuya. This is all your fault. Yes, because I fucking asked to be turned into a god's damned slave, and be stuck with your constant whining for the rest of my shitty life. Tayuya snapped back with a glare, and a growl. And now when she finally starts to open up her mouth again, Tamari starts with a sigh of irritation. Couldn't you have waited until after all this was done before you started to run your mouth like another bitch? What would be the point? You really like listening to her stupid fucking bitching like she has any more of a choice in what happens in this than we do, Tayuya responded, as she glared back at Tamari. No, but now I have 2 whiny voices I'm forced to listen to, Tamari responded back with a glare. Girls, Shizen stated sweetly, as she looked at all 3 of them, if you don't kindly behave, and only speak to have a nice, polite conversation, I'll have to conclude that you have entirely too much energy. Fortunately, I have a wonderful little training regime that was developed to push ANBU into wartime shape. The girls all wisely shut up. Sasuke shivered, as she lay on the floor completely naked. She'd already had the various symbols drawn on her skin, she'd already been prepared. Now, they were just waiting for Naruto. She heard a shuffle of movement behind her. Then she could feel a warm, calloused hand pressed onto the small space of untouched flesh between the blades of her shoulders. Immediately, she went still, afraid to even breathe, as she could feel the brush return to her skin, and the pattern completed from one to the other. A part of her wanted to speak, to turn around, to throw herself into his chest, and break down, crying, begging for forgiveness. A different, darker part of her wished she had a kunai she could use to cut open his throat. Both were forced down beneath a melancholy resignation. I take it you remember what to do, brat? The voice she wasn't familiar enough with to place, but it was male, and older, but not elderly. How could I forget? Naruto shot back with a light growl, as his hand almost clenched into her back. I just want to get this over with. The tone was angry, indignant, and maybe even a little cold. So like, and different from what she remembered of her teammate. It was obvious he didn't want to be there, that he didn't want to be doing this. She didn't know whether to laugh out loud or just break down, and start crying. Most men would have killed to be in his position, One more pretty girl to add to his little harem, the only man to own an Uchiha so completely. But he wanted absolutely nothing to do with it, nor with her. Alright, Kurama, you wanted this. Let's do it already, she heard, and briefly, she wondered who Kurama was before her world exploded into a world of rush of something she couldn't describe. The world became narrowed down to the experience of that warm, rising wave of power beginning to steadily pulse through her body. She could feel the way her whole body seemed to pulse to the rhythm of what she thought was Naruto's heart. And then the pulsing flow of yellow flowed over her. To those watching, they were both two bodies of glowing yellow chakra, Naruto's eyes a burning, calm crimson, as Sasuke opened her mouth, as if to speak, only for no words to come out. Before them, her eyes flashed wide open, and they could see her Sharingan activated. Then, before their eyes, it matured, and then mutated into a pattern none of them recognized. There was a pulse, a beat of the heart, and then the color bled away into a pale white sheen, and a spiral coiling all the way to the center of her eyes. She opened her mouth, her eyes twisting, and rotating in an almost mesmerizing display, before suddenly her scream filled the air, as the mark on her shoulder erupted, trying to spread a poisonous darkness down into her glowing body. In response, the glow only seemed to intensify, as Naruto bared sharp, curved fangs, and let out a dangerous, angry growl. Bit by bit the darkness was forced back, pushed to recede into the small mark it had previously been contained in. Then, like a squeezed zit, it pushed up a building beneath the pressure of the golden chakra eating, burning away at it from beneath. It was stronger than Tayuya's. It fought back. And then a great maw rose out of her flesh, the Kyuubi's mouth, teeth, jaws on either side of the rising pustule of darkness. And then a great swirling sphere, so very much like A, swelled in the back of its throat, and then began to eat into the darkness, grinding it away. Suddenly it shot out of the formed mouth, launching into the air, and taking the remains of the seal with it before detonating in first an implosion, then a resulting explosion that bathed the room in glittering sparkles of chakra trace, before the Kyuubi's face smirked, and was drawn back into the golden glow, receding back into Naruto's body. Sasuke's eyes spun a moment longer before falling back into the familiar black. As she collapsed back onto the floor, the familiar spiral seal formed on her back. Above her, Naruto tiredly turned, and glared at Tsunade and Jiraiya. I am not doing that again. The pair could only nod mutely in agreement. Perched atop the Hokage's head, Naruto stared out across the expanse of Konoha bathed in the amber hue of the setting sun, feeling Ino's arm threaded through his, as her head rested against his shoulder. Behind him, Tamari stood, staring off into the horizon. Kin sat down on his other side, leg dangling over the ledge, as she looked boredly, almost contemptuously, down on the village. Behind them, under the watchful eye of Anko, Yugago, and Hate, Tayuya was playing a light, experimental tune on her new flute, testing out its range. The final girl could hardly be recognized as Sasuke Uchiha. Her face was expertly done up in subtle shadings with thick, smoky lashes, and soft, glistening lips painted a glistening crimson, and framed by silken black tresses. Slender fingers, capped in a polish the same color as her lips, lead to smooth, graceful arms all the way up to where naked shoulders meet the practically molded black, cropped halter top. Mesh armor covered from her middle finger back up to her upper arms. A matching set lead from her heeled sandals up to her mid-thighs like fishnet stockings, leaving a smooth, inviting expanse all the way to the tight little black miniskirt. Sasuke could no longer be confused with the boy by any measure of the word. Kakashi and Jiraiya were watching her like hawks, never letting her out of their sights, as she stood the furthest back, as if trying to hide herself from Naruto's sight, her face covered in more than a touch of blush. Sipping a warm saucer of sake, Tsunade looked down at Naruto, and couldn't help but feel a slowly growing swell of expectation. Seated atop the head carved in the likeness of his Minato Namikaze, Naruto couldn't help but feel that now, more than ever before, things had changed in an irrevocable manner. As he stared out across the village that had been his home his whole life, he remembered the flashing grins of Kisame, and Orochimaru smirking at him with a smug, confident superiority. He remembered the look on the face of Kabuto. He remembered the subtle, unspoken words describing the situation with Sasuke. The world was changing. Now it was time for him to change with it. Team 7 was gone, broken in a way that couldn't be repaired. From the ashes of burning away the final link when he and Kurama had placed the seal upon Sasuke, here he knew that he would have to start making real choices about his future. The challenges that were coming would only get harder and harder to defeat. He was about to become a hunted man. So, tonight he would mourn the past. Tomorrow he started to fight for his future. The end. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.